What if a cartoon about a blue cat and a fish with legs has been trying to warn us about the future this whole time? I know how that sounds. I know. But just stay with me for a second, because I've spent the last few weeks going through every single season of the amazing world of Gumball, episode by episode, scene by scene, and I keep finding these moments, these throwaway gags, these background details, these entire storylines that line up with things that happened in the real world months or even years after they aired, and not in a vague, horoscope kind of way. I'm talking specific, weirdly specific. And look, I'm not here to tell you that Ben Bacalé is a time traveler. I'm not saying Cartoon Network had access to some secret crystal ball hidden in their office. What I am saying is that there's something about the way this show watches the world, something about how deeply it understands the patterns underneath the chaos that lets it say things before anyone else does. And once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. So tonight, we're going to go through every single time Gumball predicted the future, or, well, seemed to. Every moment where this kid's show about a dysfunctional cartoon family in a mixed media town looked ahead and said something that the rest of us wouldn't understand for years. We're going to talk about episodes you probably remember, episodes you've definitely forgotten, and a few that I think deserve way more attention than they've gotten. If you're here to fall asleep, get comfortable. This one's going to take a while. If you're here because you actually want to think about this, even better. Either way, I'm glad you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these for you. It's free. Takes about a second, and it means more than you know. Alright, let's start with something that most people completely overlook. There's this episode in Season 2 called The Internet. It aired on November 12th, 2013. And on the surface, it's a pretty standard Gumball episode. Gumball does something embarrassing on camera. The video goes viral. Chaos ensues. The premise isn't groundbreaking. Shows had been doing viral video episodes since YouTube became a thing. But here's what makes this one different. Here's what makes this one feel like it came from a completely different timeline. In the episode, Gumball accidentally records himself having this ridiculous emotional meltdown, and the video ends up on the internet. Fine, standard sitcom setup. But what the show does with this premise is something that, in 2013, almost nobody was talking about yet. The video doesn't just go viral, it gets remixed. It gets cut up, auto-tuned, mashed together with other clips, turned into reaction content. Gumball watches in horror as his genuine emotional moment gets chewed up and spit out by the internet's content machine, stripped of context and meaning, until all that's left is the entertainment value of his suffering. Now think about when this aired, November 2013. TikTok didn't exist yet. The remix culture we know today, where literally any moment of human emotion can be clipped, captioned, and redistributed across a dozen platforms in under an hour. That wasn't really a thing yet, not at scale. YouTube was still primarily about long-form content and music videos. Vine had launched earlier that year, but was still finding its feet. The idea that a single embarrassing moment could be endlessly repurposed, that your worst day could become someone else's entertainment forever. Gumball nailed that in 2013, 3 years before TikTok's predecessor, Musical.ly, even launched. And the episode doesn't just show this happening, it shows how it feels. There's this shot, and I need you to picture this because it's genuinely clever, where Gumball is hand-drawn, 2D, standing in front of a computer screen that's showing live-action footage of his video being shared. The animation style actually shifts. His face goes through this progression from confusion to horror to this kind of numb acceptance that I think anyone who's ever gone viral for the wrong reasons would recognize immediately. And the thing that kills me is that in 2013, most people probably watched that and thought it was just a funny exaggeration. Now, it's documentary. There's a specific line in the episode where Gumball tries to get the video taken down, and someone tells him, essentially, that once something is on the internet, it belongs to everyone. And I remember watching that for the first time and thinking, yeah, that's the joke. But the joke aged into a prophecy, because that's exactly the conversation we've been having for the last 5 years about content ownership, about consent, about who gets to decide what happens to your image once it's online. A cartoon about a blue cat had that conversation in 2013 and nobody noticed. But the internet is just the surface layer. That's the obvious one. The one people point to when they make those Gumball predicted everything compilations on YouTube. And those compilations are fine. They're fun, but they barely scratch what's actually going on here. Because the predictions, or whatever you want to call them, they go so much deeper than viral videos and internet culture. Let me take you to Season 5, Episode 37, The Nuisance, aired October 13th, 2017. And this is one of those episodes that, when I rewatched it for this video, made me actually pause and sit with what I'd just seen. Because what The Nuisance does with its 12 minutes is something that most prestige dramas struggle to do in an entire season. The setup is this. The Watterson family is deemed such a nuisance to the town of Elmore that the mayor wants to get rid of them. But instead of just kicking them out, because that would be too simple for Gumball, the mayor hatches this scheme. He's going to make the Wattersons respectable. He's going to clean them up, make them behave, raise their property values, and then, and here's the part that hit me like a truck, sell Elmore off to wealthy developers who want to turn it into a gated community. That's Gentrification. That's a 12-minute cartoon on Cartoon Network depicting, with surprising accuracy, the exact mechanism by which gentrification actually works. A government official using public resources to make a neighborhood presentable, not for the benefit of the people living there, but to attract wealthy buyers who will ultimately displace them. And the show aired this in October 2017. Now, gentrification wasn't a new concept in 2017. People had been talking about it for decades, but here's why this feels predictive rather than just topical. In 2017, the conversation about gentrification was still largely academic. It was in think pieces and policy papers. It hadn't yet become the visceral, personal, emotional issue it would become in the years that followed. The massive displacement waves in cities like San Francisco, Austin, Portland, London, those were happening, sure, but the broader cultural awareness, the point where everybody knew what gentrification meant and could feel it in their own neighborhood, that came later. 2018, 2019, 2020. And Gumball was already there. But what really gets me about The Nuisance isn't just that it tackled gentrification, it's how it tackled it. The mayor in this episode is depicted as this buffoonish figure who talks in empty promises and political doublespeak. He makes grand gestures about community improvement while secretly working to gut the community for profit. And the Wattersons, this chaotic, dysfunctional, beautifully messy family, they're the ones who see through it. Not because they're smart, not because they understand politics, but because they are the people being displaced. And they can feel that something is wrong even when they can't articulate what it is. That's sharp writing. That's writing that understands how real people experience systemic injustice. Not through analysis, but through an uneasy feeling that the ground underneath them is shifting. And the fact that this came from a show where the dad is an obese pink rabbit who's afraid of everything? I mean, come on. That shouldn't work, but it does. And the Watterson solution is equally brilliant. When they realize the mayor's plan, they don't protest. They don't file complaint. They don't go to the media. They deliberately make Elmore worse. They trash the place. They make it so undesirable that no developer in their right mind would want it. It's scorched earth gentrification resistant, and it's played for laughs. But underneath the comedy, there's a genuine argument being made about who gets to define what a good neighborhood looks like, and who gets sacrificed when that definition changes. I've rewatched The Nuisance probably 6 times putting this video together, and I keep catching new things. There's this background detail in the mayor's office, and this is the kind of thing you need Gumball's mixed media style to pull off, where you can see actual photographs on the wall of real-world luxury development, like live action photograph in a cartoon office. And those photographs look exactly like the kind of sterile, soulless apartment complexes that have been popping up in every major city over the last 5 years. The ones that all look the same. The ones with the exposed brick accent wall, and the doggy day spa in the lobby, and the rent that could feed a family of 4. Gumball put those in the background of a kids show in 2017. Nobody was supposed to notice, but they're there. Okay, let me catch my breath here for a second, because I'm about to take this in a direction you might not expect. See, when most people talk about Gumball predicting the future, they focus on the political stuff, the internet, the nuisance, the candidate, which, don't worry, we're absolutely getting to. But I think there's a whole other layer of prediction happening in this show that nobody talks about. And it's about something much bigger than politics. It's about the nature of media itself. Because Gumball didn't just predict what would happen in the world. It predicted what would happen to shows like itself. And that, to me, is the most unsettling prediction of all. Let me take you to the finale. Season 6, Episode 44, The Inquisition, aired June 24th, 2019. And I know a lot of you already know about this one, because it's become the single most discussed episode in the show's entire run. But I don't think most people fully appreciate what it predicted, even now. So here's the setup. Rob, this character who used to be a background nobody, who fell into the void, and clawed his way out only to be forgotten by everyone, who became the show's most tragic villain. Rob has a plan. He's going to transform all the cartoon characters in Elmore into realistic humans. He's going to strip away the animation. Take the cartoon out of the cartoon. And the way the episode presents this is genuinely disturbing. You see these characters you've known for 6 seasons. These bright, colorful, weird, wonderful characters animated in every style, from 2D to claymation to 3D to puppet. And they start becoming flat, realistic, boring. They lose the thing that makes them what they are. And the show doesn't play this for laugh. It plays it as horror. The last few minutes of the Inquisition feel like watching a cartoon die in real time. Now, when this aired in June 2019, nobody knew what was coming. Nobody knew that 3 years later, HBO Max, the very streaming platform that was supposed to be the future home for Warner Bros. Cartoons, would begin systematically purging animated content from its catalog. In 2022 and 2023, HBO Max removed dozens of animated titles, many of them from Cartoon Network. Shows that people loved, shows that had dedicated fan bases, shows that were, in some cases, the only versions of themselves that existed. The only place you could legally watch them. Gone. Wiped from the platform. Not canceled. Not ended. Erased. And if that language sounds familiar, if erased sounds like a word that means something specific in the context of this show, that's because it does. Because Gumball had already introduced the concept of the void. The place where Elmore sends things. It considers mistakes, the place where things go to be forgotten, the metaphysical garbage bin of a universe that would rather pretend something never existed than deal with the fact that it did. The Void was introduced in Season 3, Episode 12. The Void, obviously, aired in 2014, and in that episode, Gumball, Darwin, and Mr. Small discover this liminal space where everything that Elmore has discarded ends up. Old character, failed ideas, things that the world, and the show kind of implies the world itself is sentient, decided were mistakes. And the most disturbing thing about the Void isn't that things are sent there, it's that nobody remembers them afterward. The world rewrites itself so that the erased things were never there in the first place. Now, I want you to sit with that for a second, because in 2014, that was a metaphor, a really good one, but a metaphor, about how society discards things it finds inconvenient, about how we collectively forget the things we don't want to think about the disposability of art and people and ideas when they stop being useful. By 2022, it wasn't a metaphor anymore. It was literally happening. Shows were being removed from streaming platforms, and in some cases, having their digital existence effectively erased. Not because they were bad, not because people didn't want them, but because someone in a boardroom decided they were mistakes, financial mistake, content that didn't justify its existence on a spreadsheet. And the finale, The Inquisition, where a villain tries to turn all the cartoon characters into realistic humans, to strip away the very thing that makes them cartoon, to homogenize them into something marketable and safe and devoid of the weird, beautiful chaos that made them special in the first place. That's not just a prediction about the streaming wars. That's a prediction about an entire philosophy of how entertainment corporations view animated content as something that can be reshaped, flattened, and discarded when it doesn't fit the plan. I think about Rob a lot when I think about this, because Rob's whole character arc is essentially the arc of a show that gets canceled. He was a background character. Nobody noticed him. He fell into the void. He got erased from the narrative. He fought his way back, damaged and different. And when he returned, nobody remembered he'd been gone. He spent the rest of the series trying to matter, trying to prove that his existence meant something. And by the finale, his plan to transform everyone into humans isn't really about villainy. It's about survival. If you can't exist as what you are, maybe you can exist as something else. Something the people in charge are willing to keep around. That's heartbreaking. And the fact that a cartoon made for children articulated that fear. The fear of being erased, of being transformed into something you're not just to survive, of existing in a world that could delete you at any moment. Years before it actually happened to real shows on real platforms, I don't know what to call that. I don't think prediction is quite the right word. I think Gumball understood something about the entertainment industry, about the way corporations treat creative work, that most of us were still too naive to see. And here's the thing nobody talks about. The Inquisition ends on a cliffhanger. The last shot is this burst of light, and then nothing. The show just ends. It wasn't meant to be the finale. There were plans for more, for a movie, for some kind of continuation. But at the time, that was it. The cartoon literally ends with its own destruction in progress, and then silent. If you're someone who cares about animation, and if you've made it this far, I think you probably are. That hits different now, after the purges. After seeing what happened to Infinity Train, to OKKO, to Summer Camp Island, after seeing creators find out their shows had been removed from existence via Twitter. The Inquisition isn't just a finale, it's a document. It's a piece of art that accidentally became the most accurate depiction of what was about to happen to its own medium. Okay, I need to change gears a little because I've been in some pretty heavy territory, and I want to make sure we don't lose the thread of what makes this show so special. Because yes, Gumball predicted dark thing, but it also predicted small thing, funny thing, things that make you smile and shake your head at the same time. And if you're still with me, if you haven't drifted off yet, thank you. We've got a long way to go. Let me talk about social media for a minute, because Gumball's relationship with social media is one of the most underrated aspects of the entire show, and it connects to some of the most accurate predictions the series ever made. There's an episode in season 4 called The Gift. It aired in 2016, and the central conflict revolves around the kids trying to figure out what to get Masami, who, for those who don't remember, is literally a cloud, for her birthday. And the way they go about it is by stalking her social media profile. They analyze her posts, her likes, her friend connection. They build a psychological profile of her based on her online presence to determine the perfect gift. And the thing that struck me watching this in 2026 is that in 2016, this was satire. It was exaggerated for comedy. The idea that someone's entire personality could be reverse engineered from their social media footprint was funny because it felt extreme. It felt like something only a cartoon would take to its logical conclusion. Now, that's just Tuesday. That's targeted advertising. That's the recommendation algorithm. That's the entire business model of every major social media platform on the planet. Companies worth hundreds of billions of dollars exist because they figured out how to do exactly what the Gumball kids do in this episode, except they do it to billions of people simultaneously. And instead of buying you a birthday present, they use the data to sell you things you didn't know you wanted. And Gumball played this as a joke, as a gag, in a show where one of the characters is a sentient piece of toast and another is a T-Rex who works at the grocery store. That's the medium through which some of the sharpest media commentary of the 2000s was delivered. A cartoon about a blue cat on Cartoon Network. I keep coming back to this point, and I think it's the key to understanding why Gumball seems to predict things. The show doesn't predict the future because it knows what's going to happen. It predicts the future because it understands the present more clearly than almost anything else on television. It takes the pattern, the trend, the quiet shifts in how we live and communicate and relate to each other, and it extrapolates. It follows those threads to their logical endpoint. And because the show is a cartoon, because it's animated, because it can exaggerate, because it operates in a space where metaphor and reality are literally the same thing, it can show us those endpoints in ways that live-action media simply can't. Think about it this way. If a live-action drama tried to show you what viral culture would look like in 5 years, it would need sets and costume and special effects. It would need to create a plausible near-future world. It would take itself seriously. But Gumball can have a 2D cat stand in front of a live-action photograph of a real computer screen showing CGI representations of social media profile, all while a puppet character comments from the background. The mixed media style isn't just an aesthetic choice, it's a storytelling tool. It lets the show collapse the distance between metaphor and reality, between the present and the future, between what is and what could be. Ben Bacalé has talked about this in interviews. He's said that the show's approach to satire comes from a specific place. It comes from looking at what's happening in the world and asking, what's the funniest version of where this is going? And the answer to that question, more often than not, turns out to be what actually happened. Because reality, it turns out, is fond of punchline. You know what's funny is that I initially planned this video to be shorter. Like, noticeably shorter. But the more I dug into this, the more I kept finding these connections, these threads, these moments where the show said something that wouldn't make complete sense until years later. And I couldn't in good conscience skip any of them. So let's keep going. Let's talk about The Candidate. The Candidate is season 6, episode 10. It aired on March 2nd, 2018. And this is probably the most explicitly political episode Gumball ever produced. It's a full-on election satire. And I know, saying a cartoon satirized politics doesn't sound groundbreaking. The Simpsons has been doing it for 35 years. South Park built an empire on it. But The Candidate does something different. Something that I think is genuinely unique. The episode follows an election for some kind of student body position. Or maybe it's a local government thing. The show is deliberately vague about the specifics because the specifics aren't the point. The point is the process. And Gumball in this episode becomes a stand-in for a very specific type of political candidate. He's loud, he's uninformed, he makes big promises with no plans to follow through. He's entertaining enough that people pay attention to him even when what he's saying is nonsensical. And most importantly, he wins. Not because he's the best candidate, but because the process itself rewards spectacle over substance. Now, this is clearly inspired by the 2016 US presidential election. The episode aired in 2018, so it had 2 years to process what happened. But here's where the prediction comes in. Because the candidate doesn't just satirize the 2016 election, it satirizes election dynamics in general. It shows how spectacle becomes a political strategy, how misinformation spreads faster than correction, how people vote based on entertainment value rather than policy. And those dynamics didn't go away after 2016. They intensified. Every election cycle since then, in the US, in the UK, in Brazil, in countries around the world, has featured elements of exactly what Gumball depicted. There's a detail in the episode that I think is genuinely brilliant. While all the election chaos is happening in the foreground, Darwin is in the background, trying to get people to pay attention to a rising temperature. Like, literally. The temperature in the episode keeps going up, and Darwin keeps pointing to it, and everybody ignores him because they're too caught up in the political circus. It's not subtle. It's a direct metaphor for climate change being ignored while politics dominates the news cycle. And in 2018, that was commentary. In 2026, it's just accurate. The temperature keeps going up. People keep ignoring it. And there's a moment in the episode, and this is the kind of detail you only catch on rewatches, where a character visits a website that contains subtle references to misinformation campaign and manipulation tactic. The show doesn't spell it out. It trusts its audience to be smart enough to catch the references. And those references have only become more relevant as the years have gone on, as misinformation has become the defining challenge of our political era, as we've watched entire elections swing on viral lies and manufactured outrage. I actually have a theory about this that I've never seen anyone else bring up. I think Gumball is able to make these predictions because of its animation style, not just in the metaphorical sense I was talking about earlier, but in a literal production sense. See, Gumball episodes take a long time to produce. The mixed media approach, combining 2D, 3D, live-action backgrounds, puppetry, pixel art, requires more production time than a standard cartoon, which means the writers have to work further ahead. They're writing scripts that won't air for months, sometimes over a year, and that means they have to think about what's going to be relevant, not now, but later. They're forced to write about trends and themes rather than specific events, because specific events might be old news by the time the episode aired. And when you write about trends and themes, when you identify the underlying patterns rather than the surface level event, you end up saying things that stay relevant. That's not prophecy, it's just good writing. But it looks like prophecy when the trends you identified keep playing out exactly the way you describe them. I think that's part of what makes Gumball special as a piece of media commentary. The production constraints forced the writers to be smarter than they might have been otherwise. They couldn't just rip from the headlines the way South Park does with its week-long production cycle. They had to think deeper, and the depth is what makes the predictions possible. Let's shift into something a bit more abstract, because the predictions I've been talking about so far, viral culture, gentrification, political spectacle, corporate erasure of art, those are all fairly concrete. You can point to specific real-world events and say, Gumball did that first. But there's another category of prediction that I find even more fascinating, and it's harder to pin down because it's about feelings rather than events. I'm talking about the show's prediction of existential anxiety as mainstream entertainment. See, when Gumball first aired in 2011, kids' cartoons were mostly either silly or educational. Some were both. Adventure Time was starting to change that. It was showing that you could have emotional depth in a cartoon without abandoning the fun. But Gumball went somewhere different. Gumball wasn't just emotionally deep occasionally. Gumball was existentially terrifying sometimes, and it treated that terror as just another part of life. The Void is the most obvious example, and we've already talked about it, but there are dozens of episodes that touch on this. Episodes where characters confront the meaninglessness of their routine. Episodes where the simulation cracks and someone catches a glimpse of the machinery behind reality. Episodes where the question, "Are we real?" is treated not as a philosophical thought experiment, but as a genuine source of dread. The Signal from season 4 is a perfect example. In this episode, Gumball and Darwin start experiencing glitches in their reality, visual distortion, audio cutting out, events repeating, and the show plays this in a way that feels genuinely unsettling, not funny scary, actually scary. The kind of scary that comes from the ground beneath your feet suddenly not being solid anymore. When this aired in 2015, simulation theory was still mostly an academic curiosity. Elon Musk's famous comment about us probably living in a simulation came in 2016. The mainstream cultural fascination with "are we in a simulation?" that whole wave of content and conversation, it peaked in the late 2000s and early 2020. Gumball was already there, but it's not just simulation theory. The show's approach to existential anxiety, this idea that you can be going about your day, living your cartoon life, and suddenly the fabric of your world reveals itself to be artificial and fragile. That predicted a broader cultural mood, the mood of the late 2000s and early 2020, the sense that the systems we rely on, political, economic, technological, environmental, are more fragile than we thought. That they could glitch, that they could break, that what feels solid might not be. I'm not saying Gumball caused that mood. I'm saying it felt that mood before the rest of us did. It articulated something that was already in the air, but hadn't yet been named. And it did it through the most unexpected medium possible. A kid's cartoon where the main character has a head shaped like a bowling ball. And here's where I think the show's mixed media animation becomes genuinely prophetic. Because what is Gumball's world? It's a collage. It's different realities smashed together. 2D characters in live-action spaces, CGI objects next to hand-drawn background, photographic textures colliding with vector art. It's a world that looks, on its surface, like it shouldn't work, like it's held together by nothing more than the collective agreement of its inhabitants that this is normal. Doesn't that sound like the internet? Doesn't that sound like the world we actually live in now? This patchwork of different reality, physical and digital, real and manufactured, personal and performed, all smashed together into something that shouldn't cohere, but somehow does, as long as nobody looks too closely at the seams. I think Gumball's visual style is itself a prediction. It's what our reality looks like now. A mixed media collage of incompatible elements that we've all agreed to pretend is normal. The show didn't just predict events, it predicted aesthetic. It predicted the feeling of living in a world that's been remixed from incompatible sources. Okay, I'm going to bring it back to specifics for a while because I've been in the stratosphere, and I owe you some more concrete examples, and there are a lot of them, more than I initially realized. But first, and this is a tangent, but I think it's relevant, I want to talk about the specific way that Gumball uses live-action background, because it's something I don't think gets enough attention, and it directly relates to the show's predictive ability. Most of Gumball's backgrounds are real photographs of real places, primarily around London and the UK. They took photos of suburban streets, parks, supermarkets, schools, and then they laid animated characters on top of them. So when you watch Gumball, you're watching cartoon characters existing in the real world, not a drawn version of the real world, the actual real world. And I think that decision, which was made early in production, probably for a combination of artistic and budgetary reasons, is accidentally prophetic. Because what it creates is a show where the boundary between cartoon and reality is always visible, where you can see in every single frame that these characters are living in our world. They're animated, we're not, but we share the same space. That predicted augmented reality. Not the technology, we already had basic AR in 2011, but the aesthetic of AR. The experience of seeing digital entities overlaid on physical spaces. The visual grammar of Pokemon Go, of Instagram filters that put cartoon ears on your head, of AR furniture apps that show you how a couch would look in your living room. All of those things involve digital creations existing in photographed real spaces, which is exactly what every frame of Gumball looks like. And the show's characters don't seem to notice. They're not aware that their world is a photographic collage. To them, it's just reality, which is exactly how we treat AR and mixed reality now. We've normalized it. We don't find it strange anymore to point our phone cameras at the real world and see digital things layered on top. Gumball showed us what that normalization looks like from the inside, from the perspective of beings who have always lived in a mixed reality and therefore don't recognize it as mixed. That's a level of conceptual prediction that goes beyond individual episodes or plot point. It's baked into the show's DNA. Every frame of Gumball is a prediction about how we would come to perceive reality as a layered thing, a composite thing, a thing made of different materials and styles and levels of reality, all pressed together into a single image. All right, for real now, back to specific. Let me talk about The Copycat, Season 5, episode 15, aired in 2017. And this episode is one of those Gumball stories that seems like a straightforward comedy until you realize it's actually about something much bigger. The premise: the Wattersons discover a family that's copying their every move. Like, literally. Everything the Wattersons do, this other family does too. Slightly worse, slightly later. And at first it's played for laughs. The copycats are clumsy and obvious, and Gumball is annoyed, but mostly amused. But then the episode takes a turn, because the copycats aren't just imitating the Wattersons for fun. They're doing it for views. They're doing it because copying someone else's life generates content. And that content gets attention. And that attention has value. Even though, and this is the part that kills me, even though the copies are worth, even though anyone can see their derivative, even though there's no originality, no creativity, no soul to what the copycats are producing, it doesn't matter. Because the algorithm doesn't care about quality. The algorithm cares about quantity and familiarity. Now, this episode aired in 2017, 2 years before the phrase content farm entered mainstream vocabulary, 3 years before TikTok became the dominant social media platform and turned imitative content into the primary mode of online creativity. The copycats predicted the entire influencer economy's relationship with original content. The way that copying, remixing, and repurposing other people's work became not just acceptable, but actively rewarded by platform algorithms designed to favor familiarity over novelty. And there's a darker layer to it that I think the show was aware of, but couldn't fully articulate in 12 minutes. The copycats in the episode are a direct reference to a specific real-world phenomenon that was happening at the time. In 2017, there were reports of animation studios, particularly in certain markets, creating shows that were, let's say, heavily inspired by existing Cartoon Network property. Shows that copied the character design, the comedy style, even specific jokes from shows like Gumball. And the Gumball team knew about this. They were aware that their work was being replicated, diluted, distributed in markets where the original couldn't compete. The Copycats is about that. But it's also about everything that came after. About the content farms on YouTube that churn out algorithmically optimized videos by remixing existing content. About the AI-generated content that can now produce passable imitations of creative work at industrial scale. About a digital ecosystem where originality is a liability because it's risky and slow, and the algorithm wants fast and familiar. A kids show about a blue cat described all of that in 2017, in 12 minutes, while making you laugh. I've rewatched this episode probably 8 times putting this together, and I keep noticing new things in the background. There's a shot where the copycat family's house is visible, and it's basically the Watterson house, but slightly off, like an AI-generated version of it. The colors are a little wrong, the proportions are a little distorted. It's uncanny, and I don't think the animators knew they were describing AI generation specifically, but they were describing the feeling of it. The feeling of encountering something that looks almost right, but isn't. That weird, uneasy recognition of form without substance. Let me keep us in the realm of technology predictions for a bit longer, because there are a few more that deserve attention. Season 3 has this episode called The Procrastinator. It aired in 2015. The entire episode is about Gumball and Darwin trying to avoid doing a chore by finding increasingly elaborate distractions. And on one level, it's just a funny episode about procrastination. But on another level, it's one of the most accurate depictions of how smartphones and infinite content have rewired our attention span. The way the distractions escalate in the episode, from one thing catching their eye to that thing leading to another thing, leading to another thing, until they're so far from their original task that they can't even remember what it was. That's the attention economy in miniature. That's what happens when you open your phone to check one thing and look up 45 minutes later, having gone down a rabbit hole you never intended to enter. And in 2015, we were still in the early stages of understanding what smartphones were doing to our cognition. The big studies about screen time and attention spans, the debates about whether technology was shortening our ability to focus, those came later. 2016, 2017, 2018. Gumball had already showed us what it looked like. And the episode's resolution is key. They never actually complete the chore. The episode just ends, with the chore undone, with Gumball and Darwin having wasted their entire day on nothing. And the show doesn't moralize about it. It doesn't say, and they learned a valuable lesson about time management. It just presents the reality of distraction as a permanent state of being, which, if you've ever tried to sit down and work with your phone in the same room, you know is exactly right. Now, I want to talk about something that I think is Gumball's most underappreciated prediction, and it's one that requires a bit of setup, so bear with me. Throughout the entire run of the show, there's this recurring thread about identity, about what makes you who you are, about whether you can change who you are, and what happens if you try, and what happens if you don't. It shows up in small ways. Characters questioning their role, wondering why they behave the way they behave, asking if they have any control over who they become. And it shows up in big ways. Episodes about literal identity crises, about characters being replaced by different versions of themselves, about the terrifying possibility that you are not who you think you are. Penny Fitzgerald's arc is the clearest example of this. Penny spends the first few seasons trapped inside a shell, literally. She's a peanut with antlers, encased in a shell that hides her true form. And in the shell, season 3, episode 20, she finally breaks out. And what's underneath is not what anyone expected. She's this shape-shifting fairy creature who can become anything, whose appearance changes based on her emotion. And the show treats this with genuine tenderness. Gumball's reaction isn't fear or disappointment, it's awe. He tells her she's beautiful, and he means it. And the scene is actually kind of moving in a way that you don't expect from a show where the principal is a furry blue ape. The Shell aired in 2014, and what it depicts, a character being trapped in an identity that doesn't reflect who they really are, breaking free, being accepted and loved for their true self, dealing with the fear and vulnerability that comes with that transformation. That became one of the defining narratives of the 2000s and 2000s, not just in media, but in real life. The conversation about identity, about the gap between who you appear to be and who you actually are, about the courage it takes to shed the shell and exist as yourself. Gumball had that conversation with its audience in 2014, and it did it with grace. I'm not going to overstate the parallel. The Shell is not explicitly about any particular real-world identity struggle. It's a story about a cartoon peanut. But the emotional architecture of the episode, the fear, the liberation, the vulnerability, the acceptance, maps onto so many real experiences that people would go on to share publicly in the years that followed. And I think that mattered. I think it matters that a kid's show gave its young audience the emotional vocabulary for that experience before many of them would need it. And Penny's arc continues after the shell, because breaking out of her shell isn't the end of her story. She has to figure out who she is without the shell. She has to navigate a world that knew her one way and has to learn to see her differently. She has setbacks and moments of doubt. The show doesn't pretend that transformation is a single moment of liberation followed by permanent happiness. It shows that becoming who you are is ongoing work, uncomfortable, messy, sometimes painful work. That's not just good storytelling. That's the kind of emotional honesty that I think gives Gumball its predictive power. Because the show isn't interested in simple answers. It's interested in the complicated, uncomfortable reality of being a person or a cartoon character. But the difference matters less than you think. In a world that's constantly changing and constantly asking you to change with it. Let me shift to something a bit more lighthearted before we go deeper again, because I've been talking about heavy themes, and I want to remind you, and remind myself, that Gumball is also really, genuinely funny. Like, laugh out loud, pause the episode, rewind and watch again funny. And some of its funniest moments are also its most predictive. There's a running gag throughout the series where characters have these weirdly specific takes on technology and culture that sound absurd when the episode airs and then become completely normal a few years later. Gumball makes a comment in one episode about how one day people will just watch other people doing everyday things online and call it entertainment. This is before the live streaming boom, before day in the life content became one of the most popular genres on YouTube and TikTok, before we lived in a world where someone can make a full-time living by filming themselves eating lunch. And the show doesn't frame this as dystopian or weird. It frames it as inevitable, as the logical conclusion of a world where everyone has a camera and everyone wants to be watched. And that casualness, that matter-of-fact acceptance of what's coming, is what makes it feel like prediction rather than satire. Satire exaggerates the present. Prediction describes the future in the tone of the present. And Gumball does the latter with eerie consistency. And while we're on the topic of technology predictions, let me bring up something from season 3 that I think is one of the show's most eerily prescient moments. The Extra, season 3, episode 32. This is an unusual episode because it doesn't follow the Watterson family at all. Instead, it follows the background characters of Elmore, the NPC, the extras, the people who exist at the margins of the show. And each one gets a little vignette, a little slice of their life, showing that they have stories and struggles and moments of their own, even when the main characters aren't around. This aired in 2015, and I know this might sound like a stretch, but hear me out. I think the extras predicted the rise of NPC culture, not just the TikTok trend, where people pretend to be NPCs in livestream, though it predicted that too. I mean the broader cultural conversation about what it means to be a background character in someone else's story. The growing anxiety, especially among younger generation, that their lives are scripted, that they're playing a role they didn't choose, that they're extras in a narrative controlled by forces beyond their understanding. The NPC meme, the idea that some people are just non-player characters going through pre-programmed motions without genuine consciousness or free will, became a huge cultural phenomenon in the late 2000s. It was used as an insult, as a philosophical thought experiment, as a comedy bit, and eventually as a full-blown content genre on TikTok. And Gumball's The Extras explored the emotional reality underneath that meme years before it existed. What does it feel like to be a background character? To exist in a world where you know, on some level, that the story isn't about you? The episode's answer is complex. Some of the extras are miserable, some are content, some are fighting for attention, and some have found peace in their anonymity. It's a more nuanced take on the NPC concept than anything the internet has produced since. There's also The Uncle, Season 6. This episode introduces a new character, Ocho's uncle, who is an outdated video game character, rendered in old-school 8-bit graphic. And the episode explores what happens when something that was once cutting-edge becomes obsolete. The uncle is powerful and impressive within his own context, his own era, his own style. But in modern Elmore, he's clunky, outdated, and increasingly irrelevant. I think about this episode in the context of technological obsolescence, the way that every piece of technology, every platform, every app, every interface eventually gets replaced by something newer and sleeker and faster. The way that the skills and knowledge that made you valuable in one era can become worthless in the next. The uncle's struggle to maintain dignity and purpose in a world that has moved past him predicted the very real, very human anxiety that automation and AI have brought into millions of people's lives. The fear that you could become the 8-bit character in a 4K world, that the world could upgrade past you. And the show handles this with compassion, not mockery. The uncle isn't a joke. He's a character with depth and history and pride. His obsolescence isn't funny, it's tragic. And the episode finds a way to honor what he was without pretending he can be what he isn't. That kind of emotional sophistication, applied to a metaphor for technological displacement, is something that most adult dramas can't pull off. And Gumball did it in a show for kids. Now, I also want to talk about something that connects several episodes, and that I think represents one of the show's most sustained predictions: the collapse of trust in institutions. Throughout the series, Elmore's institutions are depicted as incompetent at best and actively harmful at worst. The school is run by a principal, Principal Brown, who is wildly unqualified. The police are useless. The government is corrupt. The media is manipulative. Healthcare is a joke. And the show doesn't present this as dystopia. It presents it as comedy, as just the way things are. In the 2011 to 2019 window, when the original series aired, trust in institutions was already declining, but it hadn't yet reached the levels it would hit in the 2020s. The pandemic, the political upheaval, the economic instability, the growing sense that the systems we rely on are held together with duct tape and wishful thinking. All of that accelerated the collapse of institutional trust to a degree that would have seemed alarmist in 2011. But Gumball was already there, already showing a world where the people in charge were clueless, where the systems were broken, where the only thing you could really count on was your family and your friends. And the show's attitude toward this, amused resignation rather than outrage, warmth rather than cynicism, predicted the emotional register of a generation that grew up watching institutions fail and decided to find meaning in personal connection rather than systemic trust. The school episodes are particularly telling. Over 6 seasons, Elmore Junior High is depicted as a place where education is secondary to survival, where the teachers range from incompetent to deranged, where the physical building itself seems to be falling apart. And the students, including Gumball, have largely accepted this. They go to school not because they believe in the institution, but because that's what you do. It's the social contract, and they honor it, even though the other party clearly isn't holding up their end. That's such a precise depiction of how a lot of people, especially younger people, relate to institutions now. You go to work even though the company might lay you off tomorrow. You vote even though the system feels broken. You pay into Social Security even though you're not sure it'll be there when you need it. You participate in structures you don't trust because the alternative, opting out entirely, feels even scarier. Gumball got this. The show understood that the relationship between people and institutions had shifted from trust to reluctant participation, and it depicted that shift through the lens of a cartoon school in a cartoon town, years before it became the dominant emotional reality for millions of people. If you're still listening, I want you to know something. I appreciate you sticking with this. I know I've been going for a while, and I know this got heavier than maybe you expected, but I think that's part of what makes this show special. You think you're watching a cartoon about a blue cat, and then suddenly you're thinking about the nature of reality, and the collapse of institutional trust, and the future of human identity in a post-deepfake world. Gumball does that to you. It sneaks up on you. And I think that sneak factor is part of why the show is so good at predicting things, because the predictions aren't front and center. They're not the point of any given episode. They're hidden in the background, in the detail, in the implications of what's happening on screen. Just like real prediction, the ones that actually come true are usually hidden in plain sight, mistaken for jokes or coincidences or background noise until they suddenly aren't. Let me do one more deep dive before I pull everything together, because there's an aspect of Gumball's predictions that I've been circling around but haven't directly addressed, and I think it's the most important one. Gumball predicted the end of childhood as we knew it, not the literal end of childhood. Kids still exist. Kids still play and learn and grow up. But the nature of childhood, the experience of being a child, has changed dramatically since 2011, and Gumball saw it changing. Throughout the series, Gumball and Darwin exist in a world that demands adult awareness from them. They're 12 years old, but they deal with existential crises, political corruption, media manipulation, identity fragmentation, surveillance, and the potential erasure of their entire reality. The show doesn't protect them from the complexity of the world. It throws them into it and watches them try to swim. And that's what happened to real children over the same time period. The internet, social media, and smartphones collapsed the barrier between childhood and the adult world. Kids in 2011 had some access to the broader world, sure, but kids in 2019, in 2022, in 2026, they have all of it. Every piece of information, every conflict, every trauma, every complexity of adult life is available to them at the touch of a screen. They're 12 years old, and they're watching the same news, seeing the same content, absorbing the same anxieties as adults, just like Gumball and Darwin. The show predicted the overinformed child, the child who knows too much about the world to be innocent, but is still too young to do anything about it. The child who is aware of climate change and political dysfunction and economic inequality and existential risk, who carries all of that awareness alongside the normal confusion of puberty and homework and social dynamic. That child is now the norm, not the exception. And Gumball depicted that child compassionately, honestly, with both the comedy and the anxiety fully intact, from 2011 onward. There's an episode, and I'm going to be honest, I don't remember the exact title, so let me describe it rather than risk getting it wrong, where Gumball becomes aware that the things he's learned cannot be unlearned. That once you know something, once you see something, you can't go back to not knowing. And the episode treats this as both liberating and devastating, because knowledge is power, sure, but knowledge is also weight. And a 12-year-old shouldn't have to carry the weight of the world's problem, but increasingly, they do. That's the prediction that hits me hardest. Not the technology prediction, not the political prediction. The prediction that childhood itself would change, that the innocence buffer between children and the full complexity of reality would erode, that kids would grow up faster, not because they wanted to, but because the world wouldn't let them be kids anymore. And Gumball, through all of this, maintains that childhood is still worth celebrating, that being 12 is still fun and weird and scary and beautiful, even when the world is complicated, that you can know too much and still find joy, that you can be burdened with awareness and still laugh until your stomach hurts. That's not naive, it's hopeful, stubbornly, defiantly hopeful. And I think that hopefulness is maybe the most important thing this show has to offer. Not the prediction, not the analysis, the hopefulness. The insistence that even in a world going off the rail, there are moments of genuine, unironic, uncomplicated happiness. There are moments where you and your best friend are just hanging out and everything is okay, where your mom yells at you for breaking something and you know you're loved, where the world is weird and broken and absurd and also somehow still worth being in. If you're enjoying this, by the way, and I hope you are, or at least finding it interesting enough to keep listening, subscribing really does make a difference. It tells us that this kind of deep, long, maybe too long analysis is something you want more of, and we want to keep making it. So yeah, if you haven't already, it means a lot. You know what? I think I need to talk about the animation more, because I keep mentioning it in passing, but I haven't really dug into why Gumball's visual approach is so important to understanding its predictive power. The amazing world of Gumball was created by Ben Bocquelet, a French-British animator who studied at the École des Métiers du Cinéma d'Animation in Angoulême, France. Before Gumball, he worked at Studio AKA in London, doing commercial animation. And the origin of the show's mixed media style comes from his time there. He had all these rejected character designs from various commercial pitches, each designed in a different animation style. And he thought, what if they all existed in the same world? That's the genesis of Gumball's aesthetic. It's not a stylistic gimmick. It's the show's foundational premise. Every character in Elmore exists in their own animation style, because they were originally from different projects, different contexts, different creative vision. And the show's world is the space where all those different visions coexist, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes chaotically, but always together. When Cartoon Network Development Studio Europe was established in 2007, Bocquelet was hired to help other people develop their pitches. When the studio eventually decided that employees should pitch their own ideas, Bocquelet took those rejected character designs and built a show around them. His initial pitch was a remedial school for reject characters, which, honestly, I wish I could see that version. But producers thought it was too dark, so he revised it into a family sitcom format, and that's what got greenlit. The show premiered on May 3rd, 2011. The animation was produced primarily by Studio Soy, an independent German animation studio based in Ludwigsburg, Baden-Württemberg. Founded in 2003 by Karsten Bunte, Torben Meyer, Klaus Morschhäuser, Matthias Schreck, and Michael Sieber, Studio Soy partnered with Cartoon Network Studios Europe for a 10-year collaboration that would define the look and feel of the entire series. And that look, that collision of styles, is what I keep coming back to when I think about why the show predicted things. Because the mixed media approach forces you to see the world differently. When you have a 2D character interacting with a 3D object against a live-action background, you're already in a space where different realities coexist, where nothing is quite what it seems, where the seams between different layers of reality are always visible. That's the world we live in now. A world where different layers of reality, physical, digital, augmented, virtual, overlap and interact in ways that would have seemed absurd 20 years ago. Where you can stand in a physical space and interact with digital objects through your phone screen. Where a live-action human and a CGI character can exist in the same frame, and nobody thinks it's strange because we've been trained by social media filters to accept that reality is malleable. Gumball's animation style predicted the aesthetics of mixed reality, not intentionally, not deliberately, but inevitably. Because when you create a world where different realities coexist, you end up describing the world we're all heading toward. Alright, let me get back to specific episodes, because I've been wandering, and I know some of you came here for example. Season 5, Episode 18, The Console, aired in 2017. And this is one of my personal favorites, because it's not just a prediction. It's a prediction inside a prediction wrapped in a parody. The Console is a full-on RPG parody episode. Gumball gets a video game console, and the game bleeds into reality, turning Elmore into a role-playing game world. Characters have health bars, an XP and stat. There are NPCs and side quests, and a final boss. It's a love letter to JRPG culture, and it's extremely funny. But here's the predictive part. The episode plays with the idea of gamification, the concept that everyday life can be structured like a video game, with points and rewards and leveling up. And in 2017, gamification was still mostly a business buzzword. It was something companies used in employee training and loyalty programs. The idea that gamification would seep into every corner of daily life, fitness apps that reward you with XP for running, language apps that make learning feel like a game, social media platforms that essentially gamify human interaction with likes and followers and streaks. That explosion happened gradually over the next several years. The console predicted the feeling of gamified existence, the way that when everything becomes a game, nothing feels real anymore. There's a moment in the episode where Gumball realizes that the NPC, the non-player characters, the background people of Elmore, don't have real thoughts or feeling. They're just there to fill the world. to make it feel populated, and he's momentarily disturbed by this before getting distracted by a side quest. And I think about that moment when I scroll through social media and see bot account, when I read comments that feel generated rather than written, when I interact with people online who might not be people at all. The console asked, in the context of a video game parody, what happens when you can't tell the difference between a real person and a programmed response? In 2017, before the chatbot revolution, before AI-generated content flooded every platform, before we started having serious conversations about whether the person you're talking to online is actually a person. I mean, come on, a cartoon about a blue cat on Cartoon Network in 2017. Let me talk about Season 6 now, because Season 6 is where the predictions get really dense. It's like the writers could feel the end coming, and they wanted to pack in as much prescient commentary as possible before the show was done. The spin-offs, Season 6, Episode 18. This one aired in 2018, and it's essentially a meta-commentary on the entertainment industry's obsession with spin-offs, reboots, and franchise expansion. The episode imagines various spin-off versions of the Gumball show, a gritty crime drama version, a cutesy toddler version, a live-action version, an anime version, and each one is played as increasingly absurd and creatively bankrupt. In 2018, the reboot and spin-off boom was just getting started. There were reboots, sure. There had always been reboots, but the specific, aggressive, throw everything at the wall approach to franchise extension that defined the early 2020s, where every mildly successful property got a prequel, a sequel, a reimagining, a for kids version, and an adult version that hadn't fully materialized yet. By 2021, 2022, 2023, it was everywhere. Every streaming platform was desperate for recognizable IP. Every beloved show was getting dug up and reanimated for a new audience. And the creative results were, often, exactly as hollow and absurd as what Gumball depicted in the spin-off. The irony, and I think the show is aware of this irony, is that Gumball itself eventually got a revival. The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball launched in 2025, and to its credit, it's actually good. Bacalé returned. The creative team returned. It's not the kind of soulless franchise extension that the spin-offs was satirizing, but the fact that it exists, that even a show which explicitly mocked the reboot trend couldn't escape it, feels like the universe confirming Gumball's prediction. Nobody gets out. Everybody gets rebooted. It's just a question of whether your reboot has a soul or not. And speaking of the revival, and I'll try not to spend too long on this because it's a bit of a tangent, but it's relevant. The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball premiered in the US on July 28, 2025. And it's interesting because it continues the show's tradition of reflecting the contemporary moment. The new episodes tackle social media, AI, health food trends. There's apparently an episode where Gumball faces off against a sentient AI that's in love, which, you know, felt like science fiction 5 years ago and now feels like a Tuesday. Bacalé has said in interviews for the revival that modern stuff lends itself to being satirized. It's begging for a beating, if anything, and he's right. The world has changed enormously since the original series ended in 2019, and it's changed in ways that are tailor-made for Gumball's particular brand of absurdist commentary. Social media has evolved from a communication tool to an alternate reality. AI has gone from a theoretical concept to a daily present. The political landscape has gotten weirder. The cultural landscape has gotten more fragmented. And the line between reality and performance has basically disappeared. If the original Gumball was prophetic, the revival has even more material to work with. And based on what I've seen so far, it's rising to the occasion. Okay, let me refocus, because I want to talk about one of the most overlooked predictive aspects of the show. And it's something that I think connects all the individual predictions into a larger pattern. Gumball predicted loneliness. Not loneliness as a plot point, not an episode about a character feeling lonely. I mean loneliness as a societal condition, as the defining emotional state of the era we're living in. Think about how many episodes revolve around characters who are isolated, who feel unseen, who exist in a world full of people, and yet are fundamentally alone. Rob is the most dramatic example, a character who literally fell out of reality and nobody noticed. But he's not the only one. There are dozens of smaller moments throughout the series where characters reveal, usually through comedy, a deep and genuine loneliness that the show treats with surprising respect. Mr. Robinson, the Wattersons' neighbor, spends the entire series trying to keep Gumball and Darwin away from him, and the show plays this as funny. But there are these moments, brief, easy to miss, where you see that Mr. Robinson's irritation is actually loneliness in disguise. He's an old man who doesn't know how to connect with people, who pushes everyone away, and then wonders why he's alone. And the show never explicitly states this. It never has a very special episode where Mr. Robinson learns the value of friendship. It just lets the loneliness sit there, underneath the comedy, for the audience to notice, or not. That's how loneliness works in real life, right? It sits underneath everything. You can be surrounded by people and still be profoundly alone. You can be funny and popular and still feel invisible. And Gumball understood this, depicted this, in a way that I think anticipated the loneliness epidemic that researchers and public health officials started warning about in the late 2000s and early 2020. The US Surgeon General issued an advisory about the epidemic of loneliness and isolation in 2023. Studies showed that social media, despite connecting people digitally, was correlated with increased feelings of loneliness, particularly among young people. The very tools that were supposed to bring us together were pushing us apart. And Gumball, which depicted a world where characters are literally different animation style, literally existing in different visual realities, even when they're standing next to each other, had been illustrating this for years. The mixed media style isn't just a visual choice. It's a metaphor for disconnection. Every character in Elmore exists in their own style, their own reality, their own visual language. They can interact, they can talk and touch and affect each other, but they are fundamentally, irreducibly different in a way that's visible in every frame. They are together, but apart, connected, but separate. The art style of the show is itself a prediction of what social media would do to human connection, bring us closer in space while keeping us isolated in experience. I keep coming back to this point, and I think it's the most important thing I'll say in this entire video. Gumball doesn't predict specific events. It predicts conditions. It predicts how things will feel. And it does this by being honest, really, deeply, uncomfortably honest, about how things already feel, in ways that most media is too polished or too afraid to acknowledge. And if you're listening to this late at night, maybe trying to fall asleep, maybe scrolling your phone while this plays in the background, think about that for a second. Think about the fact that you might be doing right now exactly what Gumball depicted years ago. Consuming content alone, in the dark, feeling connected to a voice coming through your speakers while being physically alone. This video, this format, fall asleep to a long video essay about a cartoon, is itself something that Gumball could have predicted. A generation of people who need a stranger's voice to fill the silence because the silence got too loud. I'm not saying that to be depressing. I'm saying it because I think it's remarkable that a cartoon was smart enough to see this coming and kind enough to treat it with compassion rather than judgment. Gumball doesn't judge its lonely characters. It doesn't judge you for being lonely. It just acknowledges that loneliness exists, that it's real, that it's part of the experience of being alive in a world that's moving faster than our ability to keep up. And if you're still here, still listening, still with me, you're not as alone as you think. Because there are a lot of us out here in the dark, watching cartoons and thinking about what they mean, and that's something. Okay, I need to talk about a few more episodes because I promised you every prediction, and I meant it. The Awareness, Season 5. This episode deals with social awareness and virtue signaling in a way that is, I think, the single funniest and most accurate depiction of online activism culture ever produced. The characters become obsessed with demonstrating their awareness of social issues, not because they actually care, but because being seen to care has social value. They perform concern. They compete to be the most visibly empathetic. And the actual issues they're supposedly concerned about get completely lost in the performance. This aired in 2017, before performative allyship became a household phrase, before the 2020 wave of social media activism that sparked a massive debate about whether posting about an issue counts as doing something about it, before people started putting empty statements in their bios and calling it activism. Gumball saw all of that coming, saw the entire dynamic. Genuine concern being co-opted by social performance, real issues being used as currency for personal branding, and turned it into a 12-minute comedy. And the thing that elevates the awareness above simple satire is that the show doesn't take the easy route of saying caring about things is stupid. It doesn't mock the issues themselves. It mocks the gap between caring and performing care. It makes a distinction between actually trying to make things better and posting about trying to make things better. And that distinction, which seems obvious now, was harder to articulate in 2017, before we'd had years of experience watching it play out on every social media platform. Let me also talk briefly about The Money from Season 5. This episode is about the Wattersons running out of money, and the show treats financial crisis in a way that breaks the fourth wall in a really interesting way. As the family's finances collapse, the animation itself starts to degrade. The backgrounds become cheaper, the music gets worse, the color palette gets muddier. The show literally cannot afford to look good anymore because the characters can't afford their lives. This is a brilliant meta conceit on its own term, but it's also predictive of the austerity aesthetics that would come to define post-2020 media. The streaming wars, the budget cuts, the visible cheapening of entertainment as corporations tried to do more with less. Shows getting fewer episodes, animation budgets getting slashed, visual quality declining as financial pressures mounted. The money predicted that art would start looking worse because the money behind it was disappearing. And it showed this by literally letting its own animation quality deteriorate in real time. I've been going for a while now, and if you're still awake, I appreciate it. If you've fallen asleep, that's okay too. That's what we're here for. But I want to talk about one more category of prediction before I start to bring this all together. And it's maybe the most personal one. Gumball predicted how we would feel about ending. The show's finale, The Inquisition, which we talked about earlier, is one of the most divisive finales in cartoon history. Not because it's bad, not because it's unsatisfying in a conventional sense, but because it's incomplete. It ends on a cliffhanger. The story isn't finished. The world is in danger, and we don't see the resolution. When it first aired, a lot of people were angry about this. They wanted closure. They wanted the story to wrap up neatly. They wanted an ending that felt like an ending. And I understand that impulse. We're trained to expect ending, beginnings, middles, end. That's how stories work. But I think The Inquisition predicted something about how our relationship with endings would change. Because in the years that followed, we got used to stories not ending. We got used to shows being canceled without resolution. We got used to streaming platforms dropping series mid-storyline and moving on. We got used to the fact that in the modern entertainment landscape, closure is not guaranteed. A show can exist and thrive and build a world and develop characters and then just stop, not end, stop. And Gumball's finale, which stops rather than end, which leaves its world in crisis, which offers a cliffhanger that might never be resolved, predicted that. It predicted the way we would learn to live with incompleteness, with stories that trail off, with narrative blue balls as a permanent condition of being a viewer in the streaming era. And there's something darkly funny about the fact that the show's finale is also about the threat of cartoon characters being transformed into something else, because that's essentially what happens when a show gets canceled and then rebooted. The characters you knew are gone. What comes back might look similar, might share a name, but it's not the same. The transformation Rob tried to impose on Elmore is the transformation that every beloved show undergoes when it gets picked up, reworked, and relaunched for a new audience. Although, and this is important, the Gumball revival actually avoided this fate. The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball, which premiered in 2025, brought back the original creator and maintained the show's essential character. It's one of the rare cases where a reboot feels like a continuation rather than a transformation. So maybe, in this one specific case, the prediction didn't fully come true. Or maybe it proves the prediction by being the exception that highlights the rule. I'll let you decide. Now, before I start wrapping this up, I want to spend some time with the Watterson family themselves, because I think the family dynamics in this show predict something about how families have changed, and how our understanding of family has changed in ways that are both obvious and subtle. Richard Watterson, Gumball's dad, is a stay-at-home father. He's lazy, he's irresponsible, he's often the source of whatever problem the episode is about. And Nicole, the mother, is the breadwinner. She works at the Rainbow Factory. She's the one keeping the family financially afloat. She's also, physically, the most powerful character in the entire show. There are episodes where Nicole essentially becomes an action hero, fighting with an intensity that suggests years of repressed rage. Now, in 2011, when the show premiered, this dynamic, the working mother, the stay-at-home father, was unusual for a family sitcom, animated or otherwise. The standard model was still the working dad and the stay-at-home mom. Shows were starting to play with that formula, sure, but it was still the default. Gumball flipped it from day one, and it didn't make a big deal out of it. It didn't announce, look, the mom works and the dad stays home. Isn't that progressive? It just did it, as though it were the most normal thing in the world. And over the following decade, it increasingly became the most normal thing in the world. The percentage of stay-at-home fathers has steadily increased. The percentage of households where the mother is the primary or sole breadwinner has grown dramatically. The family model that Gumball depicted as default in 2011 became the actual default for a growing portion of families by the 2020s. But it's not just the economic dynamic, it's the emotional dynamic. Nicole's character, her suppressed anger, her exhaustion, her love for her family that coexists with frustration at having to hold everything together, predicted a conversation that would become central to the cultural discourse around parenting. The mental load, the invisible labor, the way that one person in a household, usually, statistically, the mother, carries an outsized share of the cognitive and emotional burden of keeping a family functioning, and how that burden manifests as anger, as exhaustion, as explosive moments of rage that seem disproportionate to whatever trivial thing triggered them. Nicole's rages are played for comedy in the show. She's depicted as terrifying when angry. The animation shifts. The music changes. The other characters flee in genuine fear. But underneath the comedy, there's a portrait of a woman who has been holding too much for too long, and who occasionally, inevitably, breaks. And the show treats this with both humor and empathy. It doesn't judge Nicole for her anger. It understands where the anger comes from. That understanding that working mothers carry an impossible weight, and that the anger they feel is a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation, became a mainstream cultural conversation around 2018, 2019, 2020. Articles, books, social media posts, entire movements dedicated to naming the invisible labor that Nicole Waterson had been embodying since 2011. The burnout, the rage, the love that doesn't go away, even when everything else is too much. Gumball saw Nicole for who she was from the beginning. The rest of the world took a decade to catch up. And then there's Richard. Richard, who is frequently depicted as useless, who breaks things and causes problems and seems incapable of basic adult functioning. And the show loves him anyway. The family loves him anyway. Because Richard's value isn't in what he produces or what he accomplishes. It's in who he is. He's loving. He's present. He's emotionally available in a way that, for all her strength, Nicole sometimes can't be, because she's carrying too much. And that predicted something too. The conversation about masculinity that intensified through the late 2000s and 2020. What does it mean to be a man, a father, a partner, when the traditional markers of masculine value, providing, achieving, producing, are no longer sufficient or even relevant? Richard Waterson offers one answer. You can be soft, you can be silly, you can be unproductive by traditional standard and still be essential to your family's happiness. Your worth isn't defined by your career or your competence. It's defined by your presence and your love. That's a radical thing for a kid's show to say in 2011. And it's an idea that the broader culture is still wrestling with in 2026. I want to also mention the sibling dynamic between Gumball, Darwin, and Anea, because that predicted something too, in its own way. The relationship between Gumball and Darwin, best friends, brothers, inseparable, is the emotional core of the show. And it's a relationship between a biological child and an adopted one. Darwin is a fish. He's adopted. He's different from the rest of the family in the most fundamental possible way. He's literally a different species. And the show never, ever treats this as lesser. Darwin is a Waterson. He is Gumball's brother. The fact that he's adopted, the fact that he's different, does not diminish his place in the family by even a fraction. And that absolute, unquestioning acceptance of chosen family, of the idea that the people you love are your family, regardless of biology, predicted a cultural shift toward broader definitions of family that has been one of the most significant social changes of the last decade. The idea that family is defined by love and choice rather than blood and biology, that's not new. People have been saying it forever, but the cultural mainstreaming of that idea, the point where it moved from progressive ideal to widely accepted norm, happened gradually over the 2000s and 2000s. And Gumball was there from the start, showing a fish who is a Waterson, because the Watersons say he is, and that's that. I actually think about Darwin a lot when I think about this show's legacy. He's such a simple character on the surface, cheerful, loyal, slightly naive, but his existence in the show says something profound about belonging, about how you don't have to be the same as the people around you to belong with them, about how difference doesn't disqualify you from love. And in a world that has spent the last decade fighting about who belongs and who doesn't, in country, in community, in definitions of family and identity, a cartoon fish who belongs because love says so feels less like a character design and more like an argument. A quiet, persistent, unapologetic argument for the idea that everyone deserves a place. Okay, now I really do want to start going through some of the smaller predictions before I wrap up. because part of what makes Gumball's predictive track record so impressive is the sheer volume of it. It's not one or two lucky guesses. It's a consistent pattern that runs through the entire series, because part of what makes Gumball's predictive track record so impressive is the sheer volume of it. It's not one or two lucky guesses. It's a consistent pattern that runs through the entire series. The Romantic, Season 5, aired in 2017. Gumball tries to plan the perfect date with Penny by following a very specific, very elaborate plan, and the entire episode is about how planning something to be perfect, micromanaging every detail, trying to control the experience, actually ruins it. The date goes catastrophically wrong every time Gumball tries to follow his plan, and it only starts going right when he lets go and accepts the chaos. Now, on one level, that's a standard romantic comedy premise, but on another level, it predicted the rise and fall of aesthetic dating culture, the Instagram perfect date, the TikTok relationship that looks flawless on camera but feels hollow in person, the pressure, which intensified dramatically from 2018 onward, to make every experience look curated, every moment photogenic, every interaction optimized for sharing, and the growing backlash against that pressure, the realization, which more and more people had through the early 2020s, that the pursuit of the perfect experience is the enemy of the actual experience. Gumball showed that in 2017 through a 12-minute episode about a blue cat trying to impress a shape-shifting peanut fairy. And the lesson it landed on, that real connection comes from vulnerability and chaos, not from curation, is exactly the lesson that took mainstream culture another 5 years to learn. Or start learning anyway. We're still working on it. The Anybody, Season 4. This one is about identity theft. Literally, Gumball discovers he can shapeshift into other people, and he uses this ability to live other people's lives. And the episode explores what happens when you can become anyone. You start losing track of who you actually are. This aired in 2016, before deepfake, before AI face-swapping technology made it possible for literally anyone to wear literally anyone else's face in a video. Before the concept of digital identity became something that could be stolen, not just through hacking your account, but through generating synthetic media that looks and sounds exactly like you. The Anybody predicted the deepfake crisis. Not the technology itself. The show couldn't have known the specific mechanism, but the psychological experience of it. The vertigo of a world where appearance can't be trusted. The existential horror of knowing that your face, your voice, your identity can be worn by someone else without your permission. Gumball turned that into comedy in 2016, and by 2020, it was one of the most pressing technological concerns in the world. And there's a subtle detail in the episode that I think is really clever. When Gumball shapeshifts into other people, he doesn't just look like them, he starts behaving like them. Their mannerisms, their speech patterns, their personalities bleed into him. He doesn't just wear their appearance, he loses himself in their identity. And that predicted something really specific about social media culture. The way that people, particularly young people, started adopting the mannerisms and aesthetics and opinions of the people they followed online. Not just imitating them, but genuinely losing track of where the influence ended and their own personality began. The algorithm doesn't just show you content, it shapes who you become. And Gumball showed that through a magical shape-shifting premise, years before the research caught up. Let me stay with the copycats for another moment, because there's something else about it that I think is worth exploring. The episode ends with the Wattersons essentially accepting that they can't stop the copying. They can't control what other people do with their likeness, their behavior, their identity. The copycats will keep copying, and the Wattersons have to make peace with that. Now think about that in the context of AI-generated content. One of the biggest debates in creative industries right now, in 2026, is about whether artists, writers, musicians, and other creators have any control over how their work is used to train AI models. AI companies have scraped billions of pieces of creative work without permission to build systems that can generate new content in similar style. And the creators, the original artists, the people who made the thing that the AI learned from, are in essentially the same position as the Wattersons and the copycat. They're watching their creative DNA being replicated at scale, and they can't stop it. The episode doesn't offer a solution to this, and I don't think there is one, at least not a clean one, but it does offer something valuable. It acknowledges the feeling, the frustration, the helplessness, the indignity of watching your work being consumed and reproduced by a system that doesn't care about you. That feeling is real. Millions of creators are experiencing it right now. And a cartoon described it in 2017 with more emotional accuracy than most think pieces have managed since. I also want to spend some time with an episode that I think is criminally underrated in these discussions. The Love, Season 4. This episode is structured as a montage of different types of love: romantic love, familial love, unrequited love, self-love, love between friends, love between strangers. Each vignette features different characters and different animation styles, and the whole thing is set to a beautiful original song. Now, on the surface, this isn't a prediction episode. It's not about technology or politics or culture. It's about love. But I think it predicted something profound about how our relationship with love would change in the age of social media and dating apps. Because each vignette in The Love is essentially a different genre of love, a different format, a different style. And the episode presents them all side by side, without hierarchy, without judgment. Romantic love isn't presented as more important than friendship. Self-love isn't presented as selfish. The episode just shows all these different forms of love existing simultaneously, in their own visual languages, coexisting the way Elmore's different animation styles coexist. And that's exactly how our understanding of love has evolved over the last decade. We've moved away from the idea that romantic love is the only real love, that all other forms of love are lesser or secondary. The cultural conversation about love has become broader, more inclusive, more willing to acknowledge that love takes many forms and that all of them matter. And The Love, this quiet, beautiful, almost plotless episode of a cartoon, showed us that expanded understanding of love in 2016, before the broader culture caught up. I keep saying this, but the show was ahead, not by predicting specific events, but by feeling the direction of cultural change and expressing it before it happened. And while we're talking about emotional prediction, let me mention The Burden, Season 3. In this episode, the class hamster goes missing, and Gumball and Darwin are blamed. The real story involves the hamster and a turtle going on a road trip, a love story between two elderly animals that's played for comedy, but hits weirdly hard emotionally. What I think is predictive about The Burden isn't the plot, it's the tone. The episode manages to be simultaneously funny, sad, romantic, and absurd. It mixes tones in a way that, in 2015, was unusual for a kids show. Most shows for children picked a lane: comedy, adventure, education, and stayed in it. Gumball was one of the first to consistently blend tones within a single episode, shifting from slapstick to genuine emotion and back again without warning. And that tonal mixing became the dominant mode of entertainment in the years that followed. The MCU perfected the art of the joke in the middle of the dramatic scene. TV shows like Fleabag and Barry blurred the line between comedy and tragedy until the distinction became meaningless. The idea that entertainment should make you laugh and cry and think in the same breath, so that's standard now. In 2015, Gumball was already doing it better than most. Here's another one that gets overlooked: The Debt, Season 1. Way back in 2011, Mr. Robinson saves Gumball's life, and Gumball becomes obsessed with repaying the debt. He follows Mr. Robinson everywhere, inserting himself into Mr. Robinson's life, making everything about the debt. He can't let it go. The obligation consumes him. And I think about this episode in the context of parasocial relationship, the way fans relate to creator, the way audience members develop intense, one-sided emotional bond with people who don't know they exist. Gumball's obsession with Mr. Robinson in this episode mirrors with unsettling accuracy the dynamic that would come to define creator-audience relationships in the social media age. The fan who feels they owe the creator something, or the fan who feels the creator owes them something. The inability to let a one-sided relationship exist comfortably. The need to make it mutual, to insert yourself into someone else's life, to demand reciprocation for something that was never a transaction in the first place. Parasocial relationships existed before 2011, obviously, but the specific, intense, sometimes destructive form they would take in the YouTube and Twitch and TikTok era, where fans have unprecedented access to creators' daily lives and develop emotional bonds that feel real, even though they're fundamentally one-directional, that escalated dramatically in the years after this episode aired. And Gumball had already mapped the emotional territory. Let me talk about The Safety, Season 4, which aired in 2015. Darwin becomes obsessed with safety, with eliminating all risk from Elmore. He starts small, with reasonable precaution, and escalates to full surveillance and authoritarian control over everyone's behavior, all in the name of keeping people safe. I don't think I need to explain why this one feels predictive. The tension between safety and freedom, between surveillance and privacy, between protection and control. That's been the defining political tension of the last decade. From government surveillance programs, to social media content moderation, to COVID-era lockdown debates, the question of how much freedom we're willing to sacrifice in the name of safety has been everywhere. And Darwin's arc in this episode, starting from a place of genuine concern and gradually becoming the very threat he was trying to protect against, is a near-perfect template for how those debates have played out in the real world. The episode doesn't pick a side, which I think is important. It doesn't say safety is bad or freedom is everything. It shows that the desire to protect people can, without constant self-examination, become the desire to control people, and that the line between the two is thinner than we want to believe. I also want to mention The Disaster and its sequel, The Rerun, from Season 4 and Season 5 respectively. These are a two-part story where Rob acquires a television remote control that can manipulate reality. He can pause, rewind, fast forward, and change channels on the actual fabric of Elmore, and he uses this power to tear apart Gumball's life. On a meta level, these episodes are about the power of editing, the power of whoever controls the narrative to reshape reality to their liking. Rob can literally rewrite events. He can erase things that happened and replace them with different outcomes. He can manipulate the timeline. And what I find predictive about this isn't just the obvious parallel to deepfakes and media manipulation, though that's there. It's the deeper parallel to how we experience information in the social media age. Our timelines, our actual literal social media timelines, are curated by algorithms that decide what we see and when we see it. They fast forward through things the algorithm doesn't think will engage us. They rewind to show us content from days or weeks ago that the algorithm thinks we should have seen. They change channel, jumping us from one topic to another with no transition, no context, no narrative coherence. Rob's remote control is the algorithm. The show made this metaphor explicit in 2015 and 2016, before most people understood the extent to which their information environment was being manipulated by automated systems. Before we had the vocabulary to talk about filter bubbles and echo chambers and algorithmic curation as threats to our perception of reality. And there's a genuinely scary moment in The Disaster where Rob pauses reality and walks through a frozen world, examining the people around him like objects. They're not people to him anymore. They're content, things to be manipulated, rearranged, fast-forwarded through, or deleted. And I think about that when I think about how social media has changed the way we relate to other people. How it's possible now to scroll through someone's entire life, their photos, their posts, their most vulnerable moments, and treat it all as content. To pause on what interests you and fast forward through the rest. To treat a human being's existence as something you can consume at your preferred speed. Gumball showed us that in 2015 and 2016 through a villain with a TV remote. And it showed us how dehumanizing it is. How the power to control someone's narrative is the power to erase their humanity. I need to catch my breath again. We've been in some intense territory, and I want to make sure I'm not losing the warm, late night feeling of this, because this is supposed to be something you can fall asleep to, and I've been getting a bit intense. So let me tell you something personal for a second. I've been making these videos for a while now, and every time I go deep on a show, I discover something about myself in the process. With Gumball, what I discovered is that I'm more worried about the future than I thought I was. Not in a paralyzing, can't get out of bed way, just in a quiet background hum kind of way. And going through these episodes, seeing how many of those worries were already there in the show, already named, already explored, it actually made me feel better. Because if someone was smart enough to see this stuff coming, to articulate it, to turn it into art that makes people laugh and think and feel, then maybe we're more equipped to handle it than we think. That's the gift of a show like Gumball. It doesn't just show you what's coming, it shows you that someone already thought about it, that you're not the first person to have these worries, that the anxiety you feel about the future has already been processed, at least partially, through the lens of a cartoon about a blue cat in a town made of collage. And if you're listening to this right now, unable to sleep, worried about whatever it is you're worried about, whether it's big, world-changing stuff, or small, personal, can't quite name it stuff, I want you to know that Gumball already worried about it too. And Gumball found a way to laugh about it, not to dismiss it, to laugh about it. There's a difference. Okay, back to the episode, because I've got a few more, and then I'll start pulling everything together, I promise. But first, I want to go somewhere that I think is going to surprise you. Because we've been talking about big, abstract prediction, technology, culture, society. But some of Gumball's most accurate predictions are about much smaller, much more personal things about how we relate to ourselves. The Shippening, Season 6, aired in 2018, and this episode is about fan fiction, literally. Sarah, who in the show is a character obsessed with shipping, with pairing up other characters romantically, gets her hands on a notebook that makes whatever she writes come true. And she uses it to write fan fiction about her classmates, forcing them into romantic scenarios they didn't choose. Now, fan fiction is not new. It's been around for decades. But what Gumball depicts in The Shippening, the specific dynamic where fans create romantic narratives about real people, or in this case, people they know in real life, projecting their desires onto others without regard for those people's actual feelings or autonomy, that predicted the explosion of parasocial shipping culture that took over social media in the late 2000s and 2000s. The practice of shipping real people, celebrities, YouTubers, streamers, even regular people who happen to be in the same photo, became increasingly intense and sometimes genuinely harmful. Fans writing explicit fiction about real public figures, creating elaborate conspiracies about who's secretly dating whom, harassing people who don't conform to the ship they've imagined. The Shippening took that dynamic, applied it to a cartoon context, and showed its fundamental problem. It treats real beings as characters in someone else's story. It denies them agency. It's a form of control masquerading as love. And the episode's resolution, where the forced romantic scenarios cause chaos and misery for everyone involved, is a pretty direct argument against this kind of behavior. Forcing your narrative onto other people's relationships isn't romantic. It's invasive. It causes harm. And the fact that it comes from a place of genuine affection doesn't excuse the harm it causes. Gumball made this argument in 2018, before the worst excesses of stan culture and parasocial shipping had fully manifested, before real people's lives were being disrupted by fans who couldn't distinguish between their fictional creations and reality. The show saw the direction this was heading and said, this is a problem, in the form of a comedy episode about a magic notebook. And it was right. Let me also talk about The Best, Season 5. In this episode, Carmen, a character who is, literally, a cactus, decides to be the most positive, most helpful, most morally perfect person in the school. She does everything right. She's unfailingly kind, always charitable, never selfish. And the episode slowly reveals that this relentless positivity is exhausting, alienating, and ultimately harmful, because nobody can live up to Carmen's standard, including Carmen herself. The pursuit of moral perfection isolates her from the messy, imperfect reality of human connection. This predicted toxic positivity, the cultural phenomenon where the demand to always be positive, to always look on the bright side, to always maintain an upbeat attitude, became a source of genuine psychological harm. The good vibes only movement that spread across social media in the late 2000s, which sounded healthy on the surface, but actually suppressed legitimate emotion and created impossible standards of emotional performance. The Best showed that being relentlessly positive is its own form of toxicity, that forcing yourself and implicitly forcing others to maintain an artificially cheerful demeanor is not kindness, it's a prison. And the episode arrived at this conclusion in 2017, before toxic positivity entered mainstream psychological vocabulary, before therapists started writing articles about it, before people started pushing back against the Instagram culture of curated happiness. And here's what I love about how the show handles it. Carmen isn't a villain. She's not trying to hurt anyone. She genuinely believes she's doing the right thing. The episode treats her with compassion, even as it critiques her behavior. And that's so much more useful than just saying, being too positive is bad. It shows how good intentions can become harmful systems, how the desire to be perfect can become the enemy of being real. And it does it through a cactus, a cartoon cactus in a mixed media world. And it works. The Nest, Season 6. This episode involves a creature that rapidly reproduces and starts consuming everything in Elmore. The population of these creatures grows exponentially, overwhelming the town's ability to manage them. It's played as a monster movie parody, with the citizens of Elmore fighting for survival against an ever-growing swarm. Now, on one level, this is just a fun genre parody. Gumball loves its genre parody. But on another level, The Nest is about exponential growth, about what happens when something multiplies faster than systems can adapt, about how quickly a small problem can become an existential threat when the growth curve goes exponential. This episode aired in 2018, and I don't think I need to spell out why exponential growth, overwhelming institutional capacity, became a relevant concept in 2020 and beyond. The pandemic taught the entire world what exponential growth actually looks like, what it actually feels like when systems designed for normal conditions encounter exponential demand. And Gumball had already created a visual metaphor for exactly that experience. The feeling of watching something grow faster than you can process. The panic of realizing that the response you're mounting is always one step behind the problem. I'm not saying the Nest predicted COVID. I'm saying it predicted the feeling of COVID, the cognitive experience of exponential growth. The specific terror of watching charts go vertical and knowing that the institutions meant to protect you are overwhelmed. A 12-minute cartoon about mutant creatures did a better job of conveying what exponential growth feels like than most educational materials I've seen since. The Ollie, Season 6. This episode follows the perspective of a skateboard. Yes, a skateboard. An inanimate object that turns out to have consciousness, feelings, and a rich inner life. And the episode asks, if everyday objects could think and feel, what would they think about us? How would they experience being owned, used, discarded, and replaced? This is such a strange, wonderful, uniquely Gumball concept. And I think it predicted the growing cultural conversation about our relationship with objects, with the things we buy, use, and throw away. The sustainability movement, the right to repair debate, the growing awareness that our consumer habits have consequences. The Ollie asks, in the most literal possible way, what if your stuff has feeling? And while the answer is obviously fantastical, real skateboards don't have feeling. The emotional truth underneath is real. The way we treat objects says something about how we treat everything, including each other. There's a melancholy in the Ollie that I think is specifically relevant to the age of planned obsolescence. The skateboard knows it will be replaced. It knows its value is temporary. It knows that the person who owns it will eventually move on to something newer, shinier, better. And it accepts this with a quiet dignity that is honestly kind of devastating when you think about it for too long. That's the experience of being a product in the modern economy, being designed to be replaced, being valued for your function rather than your existence. And the fact that a cartoon episode about a sentient skateboard made me think about the ethics of consumer culture is, I think, a testament to just how smart this show is. The Faith, Season 6. This is another episode I want to highlight because I think it predicted something about the cultural landscape that's really hard to name, but incredibly pervasive. The episode is about Alan, the balloon character, who loses his positivity. Alan, who has been relentlessly optimistic throughout the entire series, suddenly becomes nihilistic, and his nihilism is contagious. It spreads through Elmore, draining color and joy from the world. What I think The Faith predicted is the nihilism wave that hit internet culture in the late 2000s and early 2020. The nothing matters attitude, the ironic detachment, the way that genuine enthusiasm became uncool, and cynicism became the default posture of an entire generation. The collapse of sincerity in online spaces, replaced by layer upon layer of irony, where caring about something, anything, felt like a vulnerability to be avoided. Alan's nihilism in the episode isn't played as cool or edgy. It's played as a disease, as something that spreads and destroys and leaves nothing in its wake. And the cure, spoiler I guess, for a kid's cartoon, the cure is genuine feeling, real, unironic, vulnerable emotion. The episode argues that nihilism isn't strength, it's surrender, and that the courage to care, to believe, to feel something sincerely, in a world that rewards cynicism, that's the actual strength. I mean, look, I watch a lot of cartoons. That's literally what I do. And I've seen a lot of shows try to tackle nihilism and sincerity and the balance between them. But I don't think any of them have done it as effectively as Gumball does in The Faith. The visual metaphor, color literally draining from the world, joy literally disappearing, is so simple and so powerful. And the argument it makes, that sincere feeling is the antidote to nihilistic despair, is one that I think a lot of people need to hear right now. And the show won multiple BAFTA awards for a reason. 8 wins, 11 nominations. It won the Annie Award for Best Animated Television Production for Children in its very first year, an International Emmy Kids Award in 2012, a Prix Jeunesse the same year. These aren't participation trophies. These are the animation industry's highest honors, given to a show that consistently surprised people with its depth, its intelligence, and its willingness to go places that children's animation traditionally didn't go. 28 international awards for a show about a blue cat that most people still think of as just a kid's show. I think that disconnect between what Gumball actually is and what people assume it is the final prediction I want to talk about. Because Gumball predicted that the most important cultural conversations of the 2020s would happen in spaces that mainstream culture doesn't take seriously. In YouTube videos watched at midnight. In fan communities discussing episodes scene by scene. In long-form video essays played as background noise while people fall asleep. The things that matter, the real analysis, the real emotional work, the real grappling with what it means to be alive in this strange, fast, confusing world. That's not happening in prestige television anymore. It's not happening in literary fiction. It's happening here, in spaces like this, between a voice in the dark and a listener who chose to be here. Gumball predicted us, this format, this conversation, this late-night communion between a show that was smarter than anyone gave it credit for and an audience that cares more than anyone expected. Let me sit with that for a second before moving on, because I think it's worth acknowledging something about what we're doing right now. You and me, this video, this whole thing, we're using a piece of art, a cartoon, a kid's show, a thing that society tells us doesn't matter, to process our anxieties about the world. We're using Gumball as a lens through which to examine the present and the future. We're taking a show that was designed to make 12-year-olds laugh, and we're finding in it a depth of insight that helps us, as adults, make sense of a world that increasingly doesn't make sense. And I think Gumball would be okay with that. I think Ben Bacalé and the creative team would understand, maybe even appreciate, that their show has become a tool for late-night thinking, because the show itself was always doing that. Using comedy as a delivery system for deeper questions, using absurdity as a way to approach truths that would be too heavy in any other context. There's a concept in philosophy called the Trojan horse theory of art. The idea that art can smuggle uncomfortable truth past our defenses by wrapping them in something appealing and non-threatening. A joke, a song, a cartoon about a blue cat. You let it in because it seems harmless, and then it unpacks something real inside you. Something you wouldn't have accepted if it had arrived in the form of a lecture or a textbook. Gumball is the greatest Trojan horse in animation history. It delivered more genuine insight about the state of the world than most serious, intentionally important works of art. And it did it while making you laugh about a fish with legs and a pink rabbit who's afraid of everything. The contrast between the delivery mechanism and the payload is what makes the show special. It's what makes the predictions possible. Because you can say anything if you wrap it in something funny enough. You can describe the future if you make it look like a joke about the present. And the show knows this. There are moments throughout the series, small, blink and you'll miss them moments, where the show seems to wink at its own hidden depth, where a character will say something profound and then immediately undercut it with a joke, as if to say, yes, I know what I just did, and no, I'm not going to dwell on it. That dance between depth and comedy, between sincerity and deflection, is the show's secret weapon, and it's what allows it to predict things without anyone noticing, because predictions, the real ones, the ones that actually come true, never look like predictions at the time. They look like jokes. They look like background noise. They look like a throwaway gag in a 12-minute cartoon that nobody is supposed to take seriously. And then time passes, and the joke stops being funny, and you realize it was never a joke at all. It was a warning, a gentle, colorful, beautifully animated warning, wrapped in comedy so you wouldn't look away. I want to take you through a few more episodes, and then I'm going to start closing this out, I promise. We're in the home stretch. The Girlfriend, Season 3. This episode is about Jamie, a bully character, who declares herself Gumball's girlfriend and proceeds to treat him terribly. She controls him, threatens him, manipulates him, and everyone around them treats it as normal because she's a girl and he's a boy, and that's just how relationships work. This aired in 2015, and while it's primarily played for comedy, it's also one of the earliest pieces of children's media to depict an abusive relationship where the girl is the aggressor and the boy is the victim. The episode doesn't diminish Gumball's experience because of his gender. It takes his discomfort seriously. It shows that coercive control in relationships is harmful, regardless of who's doing it and who it's being done to. The conversation about bi-directional intimate partner violence, about the fact that abusive relationship dynamics aren't limited to one gender, gained significant cultural momentum in the late 2000s and 2000s. There were studies, advocacy campaigns, legal reforms, and while The Girlfriend is obviously a comedy and not a public service announcement, it predicted the direction that conversation would take. It said, in its own way, this is a thing that happened, and it's not okay, and nobody should have to put up with it. And the fact that it said this to children, to the actual target audience of Cartoon Network, is important, because those children are the ones who grew up into the people having these conversations now. And maybe, just maybe, some of them remembered a cartoon episode where a blue cat was treated badly by a girlfriend who controlled everything he did. And they recognized that feeling in their own lives or in the lives of people they knew. And maybe that recognition, planted by a cartoon at 4 in the afternoon, helped them name something they couldn't have named otherwise. That's the power of prediction as education. Not telling people what will happen, but giving them the emotional vocabulary to recognize it when it does. The Slap, Season 3. Quick one. This episode is about Tobias claiming he was slapped by Gumball and making a huge deal out of it to get sympathy and attention, when the slap was actually nothing. It's about the inflation of victimhood, about taking a minor slight and amplifying it into a major grievance for social capital. And in 2015, that was a comedy premise. By 2019, 2020, 2021, it was a description of online culture. The way that minor disagreements get amplified into major conflict because outrage generates engagement. The way that being wronged, or claiming to be wronged, became a form of social currency. The way that platforms incentivize the performance of victimhood, because victimhood gets clicks. Gumball showed us the mechanism in miniature, the escalation, the way a small nothing becomes a big something, because there are social rewards for having been wronged. And it showed us how exhausting it is for everyone involved, including the person performing the victimhood, who gets trapped in their own escalation and can't walk it back without losing the status they've gained. That's a sharp observation. In 2015, in a cartoon for children, The Slippery, Season 6. This is an episode about Banana Joe's dad, Banana Bob, and it deals with themes of aging, obsolescence, and the fear of being left behind by a changing world. Bob tries to stay relevant, to keep up with trends and technology, and the harder he tries, the more he fails, because the world has moved on, because the things that made him who he is, his skills, his knowledge, his way of doing things, aren't valued anymore. And this isn't just about one character. This is about an entire generation's anxiety. The boomers who felt left behind by the internet. The millennials who now feel left behind by TikTok. The Gen Xers who feel invisible in a culture that skips directly from boomer to millennial in its generational discord. The universal human fear that the world you grew up in will become unrecognizable, and that the person you are won't fit in the world that replaces it. Gumball treated this fear with compassion. It didn't mock Bob for being outdated. It showed the pain of obsolescence and the dignity of trying to adapt, even when adapting doesn't work. And it predicted that this fear, the fear of being left behind by change, would intensify as the pace of change accelerated, which it had. In 2026, the world changes faster than at any point in human history. The technology you learned last year might be obsolete this year. The cultural reference you understood last month might be incomprehensible this month. And the feeling that generates, the vertigo, the disorientation, the quiet panic of a world moving faster than you can follow, that's what Gumball depicted through a cartoon banana trying to understand the internet. Okay, one more, and then I'll wrap up. The Future Season 6, Episode 34. I saved this one for near the end because it feels appropriate. The title alone is perfect for what we've been discussing. This episode has an IMDb rating of 9.3 out of 10, which is extraordinary for any piece of media, let alone a kid's cartoon. And the reason it's rated so highly is that it does something very simple and very powerful. It looks ahead. It imagines what comes next, for the characters, for Elmore, for the show itself. And what it imagines is uncertainty. It doesn't present a utopia or a dystopia. It presents a question mark. The future, according to Gumball, is not something you can predict. It's something you walk into blind, hoping for the best, carrying whatever tools you've managed to gather along the way, which is, honestly, the most accurate prediction the show ever made. The future is uncertain, always has been, always will be. And all the specific predictions I've been talking about tonight, all the episodes that got technology right, that got culture right, that got the emotional temperature of an entire era right, they're not the point. The point is that the show taught its audience how to face uncertainty, how to walk into the unknown without freezing, how to laugh at the chaos instead of being paralyzed by it. That's the real prediction. Not what happened, but how to face what happened. And Gumball, this weird, beautiful, mixed media cartoon about a blue cat and his fish brother and their impossible town, taught an entire generation how to do that. Not through lectures or lessons or morals of the story, through jokes, through absurdity, through the simple act of showing characters who face impossible, incomprehensible situation and find a way to keep going. That's the prediction that mattered most, and it came true. The Choices, Season 4. This one aired in 2016, and it's about Nicole, Gumball's mother. The episode explores all the different paths her life could have taken, every choice she ever made, every fork in the road, every moment where a single decision could have sent her life in a completely different direction. It's basically a multiverse story. Nicole sees the infinite branching possibilities of her existence. And this is interesting because multiverse stories have become the dominant narrative framework of the 2020s. Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse, Everything Everywhere, All at Once. Doctor Strange, in the Multiverse of Madness. The multiverse as a storytelling device has exploded in the last few years, but Gumball did it in 2016 in a single episode, and I'd argue it did it better than most of those bigger, more expensive version. Because the choices isn't really about the multiverse as a sci-fi concept. It's about the weight of choice in a single human, or cartoon cat, life. It's about the terrifying, beautiful reality that who you are is the sum of every decision you've ever made, and that you could just as easily be someone completely different. The episode treats this with real emotional weight. Some of Nicole's alternate lives are better than her current one. Some are worse. Some are just different. And the show doesn't tell you which one is the right one, because there is no right one. There's just the one she has. And the episode's conclusion, that Nicole's life, with all its chaos and imperfection, is the one she chose, and that choice has value, is genuinely moving. But beyond the emotional content, the choices predicted the multiverse trend in popular culture. The idea that audiences would become fascinated with alternate versions of characters, with the paths not taken, with the concept that reality is just one possibility among infinite others. That fascination was still niche in 2016. By 2022, it was the biggest thing in entertainment. And Gumball had already done it, already explored it, already found the emotional truth at its center. And while we're on the choices, this episode also predicted something about how we would come to think about regret in the social media age. Because social media, by its very nature, shows us the lives we could have had. Every scroll through Instagram or Facebook or TikTok is a parade of alternate reality. Other people living the life you almost lived, or could have lived, or wish you had lived. The path not taken isn't abstract anymore. It has a face and a feed and an engagement rate. Nicole looking through her alternate lives in the choices is essentially what happens every time you compare yourself to someone on social media. You see the version of yourself that moved to that city, took that job, married that person, made that choice, and the emotional weight of that comparison. The mix of curiosity and envy and grief and acceptance is exactly what the episode captured in 2016, before the worst of the comparison culture that social media would create. The episode's conclusion, that the life you have, however imperfect, is valuable because it's yours, is the exact antidote to the comparison trap. It's the thing that therapists and wellness influencers and self-help books have been trying to say for years. Stop comparing your reality to other people's highlight reel. Gumball said it first, through a cartoon cat looking at alternate timeline. I also want to talk about something that I've been thinking about throughout this entire video, which is the way that Gumball handles time itself. Because the show does something really unusual for a serialized cartoon. It acknowledges the passage of time without aging its characters. Gumball is 12 years old in season 1, and he's 12 years old in season 6. 8 years of production, 12 years old the entire time. And that stasis, that frozen in time quality, is itself a prediction. Because that's what childhood feels like in the social media age. Time passes, the world changes, new technologies emerge, new cultural moments happen, new crises unfold. But you're still 12. You're still in school. You're still trying to figure out who you are. The world moves at the speed of light, and you're standing still in the middle of it, trying to process experiences that are happening faster than you can absorb them. Gumball's eternal 12ness captures that feeling perfectly. He's been 12 through the rise of social media, through political upheaval, through cultural transformation, through the near death and rebirth of his own show. He's experienced all of it from the same fixed position, a kid in school, in a town that doesn't make sense, trying to keep up with a world that won't slow down for him. And I think about the children who grew up watching this show, who were 12 when it started and were 20 when it ended, who watched Gumball stay the same age while they changed, grew up, moved on. There's something bittersweet about that, about watching a character who never has to face the thing you're facing, the inevitable, irreversible process of growing up. Gumball gets to stay 12 forever. You don't. And the show's refusal to acknowledge that, its insistence on keeping its characters frozen while the world around them changes, is both a comfort and a gentle reminder of what childhood is. A temporary state that feels permanent until suddenly, without warning, it isn't. There's another episode I want to mention, The Brain, Season 5. In this episode, Anais, the youngest Watterson, the genius of the family, tries to dumb herself down to fit in. She realizes that being smart makes her different, and being different makes her a target. So she suppresses her intelligence. She pretends to be less than she is so that other people will feel comfortable around her. And this is such a specific, such a painfully accurate prediction of the anti-intellectual current that gained momentum through the late 2000s and into the 2020s. The idea that expertise is suspicious, that being smart makes you untrustworthy, that there's a social cost to intelligence. We've seen this play out in real life in dozens of ways. The distrust of scientists during public health crises, the backlash against elites in political discourse, the way social media rewards confident ignorance over humble expertise. Anace's experience in this episode, the pressure to hide what you know, to shrink yourself so others don't feel threatened, predicted a cultural mood that has only intensified. And the episode doesn't have a neat resolution. Anais doesn't suddenly find a way to be smart and popular. The tension remains, which is, again, more honest than most shows are willing to be. Let me do a quick run through some smaller moments that I think deserve mention, even if they don't warrant full analysis. In The Detective Season 5, there's a sequence where characters try to solve a mystery by reviewing security camera footage, and the show plays with the idea of surveillance being everywhere, cameras in every corner, every action recorded. In 2017, this was heightened for comedy. In 2026, it's just life. Ring doorbells, dashboard cameras, body cameras, CCTV on every street corner. We live in the surveillance world that Gumball depicted as absurd. In The Stars, Season 5, the Wattersons discover the power of online reviews and rating, and how a single bad review can destroy someone's livelihood. They weaponize the rating system, leaving devastating reviews as petty revenge. This aired before the full-blown cancel culture and online reputation economy that dominated discourse from 2018 onward. Before Yelp warriors and review bombing and the entire ecosystem of online reputation management became serious cultural forces. In The Bus, Season 3, there's an episode about a hostage situation on a school bus that turns out to be an elaborate prank. The episode plays with the audience's expectations about threat and safety in a way that, in retrospect, feels like it predicted the entire era of swatting, fake threats, and the blurring of real and manufactured danger in the online age. And in The Puppets, Season 4, we get an episode where Gumball and Darwin are literally controlled by puppet. Or rather, the episode shifts into a puppet show format, where the characters become aware that something else is pulling their string. This meta-awareness of being controlled, of being manipulated by forces outside your perception, that predicted the growing awareness of algorithmic influence, of the way our behavior is shaped by systems we can't see. We are, in a sense, all puppets of the platforms we use. Our strings are just made of code instead of yarn. Every time I sit with these episodes, I find new connection, new layers, new ways that a cartoon made between 2011 and 2019 managed to anticipate the world of 2026. And I think the reason I keep finding them is that there's no bottom to this well. Gumball is, at its core, a show about what it means to exist in a world that doesn't make sense. And our world doesn't make sense. Not in 2011, not in 2019, and certainly not now. The show's mixed media animation style is the perfect visual metaphor for a world where incompatible realities coexist. The characters' constant, low-level existential anxiety is a perfect emotional metaphor for life in the 2020s. The show's meta-awareness, its knowledge that it's a cartoon, its understanding that it exists at the mercy of forces beyond its control, is a perfect structural metaphor for our relationship with the institutions and systems that govern our lives. Everything about Gumball, from its visual design to its narrative structure to its emotional register, was built to describe a world that didn't fully exist yet when the show started. And that's either the most remarkable coincidence in television history, or it's evidence that animation, good animation, honest animation, animation that takes itself seriously enough to be silly, can see things that nothing else can. I want to take a moment to talk about what all of this means for Ben Bocquelet and the creative team behind the show. Because when we say Gumball predicted something, what we're really saying is that a group of writers, animators, voice actors, and producers created something that was smarter than anyone gave it credit for. These were people working insane hours on a children's cartoon for Cartoon Network, probably not thinking about legacy or prophecy or future relevance. They were thinking about making something good, something funny, something that would resonate with the kid watching after school and the parent watching from the couch. And the fact that what they made turned out to be predictive. I think that's a function of their honesty more than their foresight. They weren't trying to predict the future. They were trying to tell the truth about the present. And truth has a longer shelf life than anyone expects. Bokale has said in interviews that the show's creative process involves the entire team sharing their most embarrassing, most honest personal experiences and mining them for comedy. We dig into everyone on a cruise past for their most shameful or problematic moments as children, he said. Then we exploit this and turn it into comedy. And I think that approach, that willingness to be honest about the messy, embarrassing, uncomfortable realities of being a person, is what gives the show its predictive power. Because the messy, embarrassing, uncomfortable realities of being a person don't really change. The technology changes, the politics change, the cultural reference points change, but the human stuff, the loneliness, the desire to be seen, the fear of being erased, the need to matter, that's constant. And if you write about that honestly, you end up writing about the future, because the future is just the present's emotions wearing different clothes. Let me talk about one more thing before I start my closing thought. I want to talk about Elmore itself, because I think the town of Elmore is one of the most underrated world-building achievements in the history of animation, and it's central to understanding why the show is so predictive. Elmore is a town where literally anything can exist. Clouds go to school with bananas, dinosaurs work at grocery stores, pieces of toast and sentient balloons and cartoon mice and live-action chin characters all share the same physical space. The town has no aesthetic coherence. It has no rules about what can or can't be real. It is essentially the internet given physical form. Think about that. Elmore is a place where any kind of entity can exist, regardless of origin or format or style or logic, where 2D characters and 3D characters and live-action objects all occupy the same world and interact as though this is perfectly normal, where the boundaries between different realities are so porous that they're essentially non-existent. That's the internet. That's social media. That's the world we live in now, where any kind of content, any kind of person, any kind of idea, any kind of reality can exist in the same feed, the same timeline, the same scroll, where a news article about climate change sits next to a meme about a cat sits next to a conspiracy theory, about the government sits next to a recipe for banana bread, where nothing is filtered by logic or coherence or compatibility, where the mixed media collage of Elmore has become the mixed media collage of our daily information intake. Gumball built a world that predicted the internet's effect on reality. Not the internet as a technology, we already had that. The internet as an aesthetic, as a way of experiencing the world, as a mode of existence where incompatible things coexist, and we all just agree to pretend that's normal. And the characters of Elmore, who've lived in this mixed reality world their entire lives, who've never known anything different, they're us. We grew up in a world of increasingly mixed reality, of increasingly porous boundaries between real and virtual, between authentic and performed, between fact and fiction. And like the citizens of Elmore, we mostly don't notice anymore. We've adapted. We've accepted the collage as the default state of things. But every now and then, something glitches, something breaks, something doesn't line up. And for a moment, we see the seam. We see that the different layers of our reality, the 2D and the 3D and the live action, don't actually fit together. That they're held in place by convention, not by logic. That the world we live in is a construction, and constructions can be deconstructed. Gumball shows those moments too. The glitches, the breaks, the moments where Elmore reveals itself to be artificial. And those moments are always unsettling, even when they're played for comedy, because they're honest. They're acknowledging what we spend most of our time trying to ignore, that normalcy is a performance, and the stage could collapse at any time. I've been thinking about Elmore a lot since I started making this video, and I keep coming back to one thought. Elmore is the most realistic fictional setting in television animation, not despite its absurdity, because of it. Because our world is absurd. Because the reality we live in is a mixed media collage of incompatible elements held together by collective delusion. And Elmore, for all its cartoon chaos, is honest about that in a way that more realistic settings aren't. That honesty is what makes the predictions possible, and that honesty is what makes the show endure. And I want to add one more thing about Elmore before I pull everything together, because I think it's important. Elmore is a town with rules that nobody fully understands. There are forces at work, the void, the world's apparent sentience, the mysterious mechanism by which things are created and destroyed, that operate above and beyond the character's comprehension. The citizens of Elmore live in a system they can't fully understand, governed by powers they can't fully see, subject to rules they didn't agree to, and can't change. And I don't think I need to spell out why that resonates in 2026. We all live in systems we don't fully understand. Algorithms we can't see shape what we know and think and feel. Corporate decisions made in boardrooms thousands of miles away determine what art we can access, what jobs are available, what information reaches us. Political forces operate at scales that make individual agency feel like an illusion. We are all citizens of Elmore, living in a mixed media world that follows rules we didn't write. But the citizens of Elmore keep going. They keep living their lives, forming relationships, having adventures, making mistakes, learning, growing, laughing. They don't fully understand their world, and they don't need to. They just need each other. That's enough. I think about this a lot. Probably more than is healthy, but I think it's the most comforting thing Gumball has to offer. Not predictions about the future, not warnings about what's coming, but the simple demonstration that life can be good even in a world you don't understand. That meaning can be found even in absurdity. That joy is possible even when the ground beneath your feet is a photograph of a London suburb and the person next to you is a puppet and the sky above you might be a TV screen. If that's true in Elmore, it can be true here too. And you know what? I want to mention one more production detail because I think it mattered. The show was produced primarily in London at what was then Cartoon Network Studios Europe and is now Hanna-Barbera Studios Europe. The live-action backgrounds were photographed in and around London. The show's visual identity is fundamentally British. The terraced houses, the gray skies, the specific quality of light in those outdoor photographs. It's suburban Britain, photographed and then filled with impossible creatures. And that Britishness, that specific mundane, slightly melancholy quality of British suburban life is part of what gives the show its emotional honesty. Because British suburbia is ordinary. It's the opposite of glamorous. It's where nothing is supposed to happen. And Gumball takes that ordinary, that nothing is supposed to happen quality, and fills it with the most extraordinary things imaginable. It says, even here, in the most ordinary place, there is wonder, there is chaos, there is meaning. You just have to look. That's a prediction about how to live. Not what will happen, but how to see what's already happening. And I think it's the prediction that matters most. All right, I really am pulling it all together now, for real this time. I can hear you thinking, you've said that before, and you're right. I have, but this time, I mean it. When I started researching this video, I expected to find a handful of funny coincidences, episodes that happen to line up with future events in amusing ways. The kind of thing you'd see in a Simpsons Predicted It compilation, entertaining, but surface level. When I started researching this video, I expected to find a handful of funny coincidences, episodes that happen to line up with future events in amusing ways. The kind of thing you'd see in a Simpsons Predicted It compilation, entertaining, but surface level. What I found instead was something much more interesting and much more unsettling, because Gumball doesn't predict specific events the way The Simpsons does. The Simpsons predicts headline. Gumball predicts condition. Gumball predicts how things will feel. It predicts the texture of the future rather than its fact. And I think that's more impressive, even though it's less dramatic. Predicting that a specific person will become president or that a specific technology will be invented. That's fun, but it's either lucky or informed speculation. Predicting that an entire generation will feel lonelier, that media will become more disposable, that the line between reality and performance will blur, that the systems we trust will reveal themselves to be fragile, that the art we love will be treated as expendable by the corporations that own it. That's not luck. That's understanding. Deep, genuine understanding of the forces that were already shaping the world, even if most of us couldn't see them yet. And the fact that this understanding is embedded in a cartoon, a bright, colorful, absurdist cartoon made for children, animated in a dozen different styles, set in a town where a T-Rex and a banana and a ghost and a blue cat all go to the same school. That makes it even more remarkable, because it means that the insights weren't hidden in prestige television or literary fiction or academic papers. They were right there on Cartoon Network at 4 o'clock on a weekday afternoon, available to anyone who is paying attention. I think that says something about the value of animation as a medium, about the value of things we dismiss as just cartoon or just for kids. The amazing world of Gumball is the most insightful piece of media commentary of the 2000s, and most people have no idea because they didn't watch it, because they assumed it was just a kids show, because the depth was hidden inside something that looked simple, and that in itself is something Gumball predicted. The show is constantly aware of being underestimated, of being dismissed because of what it is. Characters in the show frequently bump up against the limitations of being cartoon. They know, on some level, that they're not taken seriously, that the world they exist in could be canceled, literally, at any moment. And they persist anyway. They find meaning anyway. They love and fight and laugh and exist anyway, in the face of potential erasure. That's the most hopeful prediction Gumball ever made. Not that things would get worse, though it predicted that too, but that in the face of things getting worse, we would persist. We would find ways to matter. We would refuse to be erased, like Rob. Rob, who fell into the void and clawed his way back, who was forgotten by everyone and still insisted on existing, who refused to accept that being discarded meant being worthless. Rob is the prediction that matters most. Not because his plan worked, it didn't. Not because he got a happy ending. The show ends before we know, but because he tried. Because he refused to disappear quietly. Because he looked at a world that had declared him a mistake and said, no, I'm going to matter. And I think about that when I think about the shows that were erased from streaming platform. The creators who found out via Twitter that their work had been removed from existence. The fans who lost access to the stories that meant something to them. The art that was discarded because someone in a boardroom decided it wasn't worth the server space. Gumball predicted all of that. And it also predicted the response, the refusal to accept it, the fan campaign, the preservation efforts, the communities that said, no, this matters, and you don't get to decide it doesn't. The fact that the show itself came back, years after its abrupt ending, because enough people cared enough to make it happen. That's the real prediction, not the dark stuff, though the dark stuff is there. The real prediction is that we would care enough to fight for the things we love. That erasure wouldn't be the end, that the void could be escaped from if you wanted it badly enough. We've been going for a while now, and I know I said at the beginning that we'd cover every time Gumball predicted the future, and I think we've covered the major one. The viral culture, the gentrification, the political spectacle, the corporate erasure of art, the loneliness epidemic, the identity conversation, the gamification of existence, the attention economy, the content farm economy, the reboot culture, the austerity aesthetics, the simulation anxiety, the way endings stopped being ending, the parasocial shipping culture, the toxic positivity, the exponential growth panic, the anti-intellectualism, the deepfake identity crisis, the family structure shift, the multiverse obsession, the end of childhood as we knew it, the collapse of institutional trust, the nihilism wave, the surveillance normalization, the victimhood economy, the fear of obsolescence, and underneath all of them, the show's fundamental insight that the present contains the future, if you look at it honestly enough. That's a lot. I know, that's a lot for a kid's show to carry. But the thing about Gumball is that it carries all of this without breaking a sweat. It carries the weight of a dozen predictions about the future of human civilization. And it does it while making you laugh about a T-Rex eating a hot dog, or a balloon deflating at an inopportune moment, or a piece of toast getting stuck in a toaster, which, in Gumball's world, is basically murder. The comedy and the depth aren't in tension. They support each other. The comedy makes the depth accessible, and the depth makes the comedy meaningful. And together they create something that is, I believe, one of the most important works of animation ever produced. I don't say that lightly. I know how it sounds. Most important works of animation. About a show on Cartoon Network. But I believe it. I believe it because no other animated show has demonstrated such a consistent, accurate, emotionally honest understanding of where the world was heading. No other show has used the medium of animation, the specific capabilities of animation, the specific freedoms that animation provides, to illuminate the present and predict the future the way Gumball had. Not The Simpsons, which predicts events, but not feeling. Not Futurama, which predicts technology, but not culture. Not BoJack Horseman, which predicts emotional states, but within a limited aesthetic framework. Gumball does all of it. Events, feelings, technology, culture, aesthetics, philosophy. In 12-minute episodes with mixed media animation on a kid's channel at 4 in the afternoon. If that's not one of the most important works of animation ever produced, I don't know what is. And look, I've been talking about the original series mostly tonight. 6th season, 240 episodes, airing from May 3rd, 2011 to June 24th, 2019. 8 years. But the story isn't over. The wonderfully weird world of Gumball is here now, with new episodes tackling the 2020s the way the original tackled the 2010. AI, social media evolution, the post-pandemic world, all of it is material for Gumball's particular brand of absurdist prophecy. And there's a movie still in development. Bocalé has said he has a new angle for it. He said it will address the big questions the show has been building toward. The meta questions about the nature of the show's reality, about what it means to be a cartoon in a world that can erase you, about whether the citizens of Elmore are truly alive or just performing aliveness for an audience they can't see. Those questions have only gotten more urgent since 2019. In a world of AI-generated content, of deepfake, of virtual influencers, of the blurring line between human and machine. The question of what it means to be real, to be alive, to be conscious, isn't abstract anymore. It's pressing. It's relevant to all of us. And Gumball has been asking it since season 3. The show has been living inside this question for over a decade, exploring it from every angle, in every animation style, through every character. And if the movie ever gets made, and I hope it does, I really do, it will have more to say about these questions than any piece of media has the right to. But there's one more thing I want to say before I let you go. And it goes back to the question I asked at the very beginning. What if a cartoon about a blue cat and a fish with legs has been trying to warn us about the future this whole time? I think the answer is, it wasn't trying to warn us. It was trying to describe us. It was holding up a mirror made of 2D animation and 3D rendering and live action photography and puppetry and pixel art, and it was showing us who we are. And we look in that mirror a lot like a dysfunctional family in a town full of impossible creatures, trying our best, failing often, and somehow making it work anyway. But that's what the amazing world of Gumball predicted more than anything else. That the future would be weird, that it would be chaotic, that it would be made of incompatible elements smashed together in ways that shouldn't work, but somehow do. That it would be funny and sad and terrifying and beautiful, often all at the same time. That it would look, in other words, exactly like Elmore. And I don't know about you, but I find that kind of comforting. Not because the future isn't scary, it is. Gumball predicted that too, but because if a cartoon can look at all of this, the chaos, the loneliness, the erasure, the rapid transformation of everything we thought was solid, and still find reasons to laugh, still find moments of tenderness, still find beauty in the collision of incompatible reality, then maybe we can too. I want to thank you for being here tonight, for listening to me talk about a cartoon for way longer than is probably reasonable, for being part of this community that cares about these things, that believes animation deserves the same critical attention as any other art form, that sees depth where others see simplicity, that stays up late thinking about cartoons and doesn't apologize for it. Whether you've been here from the beginning or this is your first time, whether you're wide awake or barely hanging on, whether you came for the predictions or the analysis, or just the sound of someone talking while you drift off, thank you. This community is something special. I know every YouTuber says that, but I mean it. The fact that thousands of people want to spend hours thinking about the amazing world of Gumball, a cartoon that most of the world doesn't take seriously, tells me something about the kind of people you are. Curious people, thoughtful people, people who look at a cartoon about a blue cat and see the universe reflected back at them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I really would appreciate it. It helps more than you know. It means we can keep making these videos, keep going deep on shows that deserve the attention, keep having these conversations in the quiet hours when the rest of the world is sleeping. That question I asked at the start, what if a cartoon has been trying to warn us about the future? I think the answer is simpler and more beautiful than I initially imagined. It wasn't warning us, it was preparing us. It was showing us, in bright colors and absurd comedy and mixed media chaos, that the future is survivable, that it's weird, but it's ours, and that the things we dismiss, the cartoons, the kids' shows, the entertainment we consume to fall asleep, might be the things that understand us best. Gumball understood us before we understood ourselves. And it did it with a blue cat, a fish with legs, a town made of photographs and impossible creatures, and more heart than any piece of media has the right to contain. That's not prediction. That's love. Love for the audience, love for the medium, love for the messy, beautiful, frightening experience of being alive in a world that changes faster than anyone can keep up with. If you take one thing from this video, I hope it's this. The things you love are smarter than you think. The cartoons you grew up on, the shows you watch to relax, the content you consume in the dark at 2 in the morning, they're seeing things, they're saying things, they're holding up mirrors you didn't ask for and showing you reflections you didn't expect. And if you pay attention, really pay attention, the way we've been paying attention tonight, you might find that a cartoon about a blue cat has more to teach you about the future than anything in a textbook or a TED Talk or a news broadcast. Good night, everyone. Sleep well.